you, Jim. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting, 14th of April, 8th of July. Thank you all for coming. There are no fire drills planned. If the fire alarm is activated, which is a continuous siren with a flashing red light, please leave the building immediately following the fire exit signs. Do we have any absences or apologies? Apologies for absence or substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies of absence from Councillor Leyland and an apology of absence from Councillor Lindop, who is joining us on Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, then moving on to agenda item 1, minutes. Are people happy that, are members happy that I sign the minutes as a true record of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 14th of April? Yes, good. Okay, I'll sign those. I'll sign those at the end if that's all right. Right, agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest not already registered? No. Okay, speeding along. Agenda item 3, actions from the previous meeting. So pertaining to page 9, we've got an answer here that this item has been raised in other committees. Portfolio holders are aware of the issue, and FIAC, as are FIAC members and CGAC members, are fully aware of the service issues. Hence, the significant changes taking place in 2026. Everybody happy with that? Anyone not happy with that? Okay, and then action 2, I saw an email earlier on today. I don't know if other people will have seen that. That came out from yourself, Charlie. That's right, isn't it? At about 3:20. Has anyone not seen that? Does anyone need me to read it to them? No, okay. And anybody got any questions or concerns about that? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. From the email, it says that an internal audit of this area would need to be commissioned and undertaken externally. So are we going to discuss that, or is that just being just as an open question?
No, yeah, and I had the same sort of similar thought myself when reading this. So I guess, David, my thought on reading this was, okay, it hasn't been done for quite some time. We probably need to think about where it would sit in our order of priorities, as compared with, with other, audits that are planned, whether, the fact that it requires external input, I don't think should particularly influence where it sits in the audit stack. Is that something that you have done, or that perhaps you could reflect upon and come back to us?
Yes, certainly we can move this forward, and I think we can commission a suitable audit subject to budget being available to do so. Okay.
Well, in that case, if I can leave with you an action of, and I do have the papers from the last meeting. Obviously, we talked in the last meeting about what audits we have done in the last 3 years and what's coming up, but I can't remember off the top of my head, what they all are, and where this one would fit into the sort of the hierarchy of priorities. I mean, Steve, I think you raised it as a question, didn't you? So, maybe David, if you could have a think about where you think it best fits in terms of prioritisation, and if you could maybe drop myself and Steve an email back with your suggestion, and then we'll either deal with it at the next committee, or we can deal with it offline by email, if that's all right. Steve, does that work for you? Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. And Councillor Robinson, does that work from your perspective? Good. All right. In that case, I think that deals with actions from the previous meeting. Agenda item 4, responses from Council Cabinet or Council Committees to the committee's reports or recommendations, if any.
There are none, Chair.
None. Good. That's 4 done. Okay. If this isn't the highlight of the evening, I don't know what will be. Agenda item 5, members allowance scheme monitoring. Martin.
I've moved. I'm here. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for bringing me in like that. That's a billing that I hope to live up to This is your annual report on the members' allowance scheme monitoring for 25-26. This shows the allowances which have been paid. The figures are the figures. I don't think I've detected an addition error in there, so those are simply to be read. It's unremarkable this year, as in so many, shows what has been. As you can see from the report, 14 members out of 54 claims travelling expenses. That again is unremarkable. That's normal. There are no unusual claims, and I have nothing further to report, but I am happy to answer questions. And if I may, before I sign off, I do have another matter I'd like to raise after I've answered any questions, if I can.
So, members, any questions for Martin or any questions on the report? Councillor Skinner with a very smart haircut, if I may say.
Thank you very much. It's partly because my barber has air conditioning, so I thought I would patronise him, but thank you. It's possible, it's perhaps probable that we don't have the answer, but do we have any idea how these figures compare to those of the councils with whom we are likely to be merged in the foreseeable future?
Not a specific idea. However, I can say that the Joint Independent Remuneration Panel, which created the scheme, worked with at least 2 of those other councils, the 2 Tunbridges. So they're on a comparable basis. Our scheme is based on the resources available, which I, again, don't think are particularly different. They may be different in some regards, but not in others. And there is benchmarking undertaken with other authorities. So I don't have a specific answer, but I think they are comparable.
Councillor Skinner, is that enough, or do you want us to?
I think it's enough. I just wanted to make sure that we, as far as Martin was concerned, we were generally in the right kind of ballpark.
Okay, great, thank you, and thanks for not asking the sort of more detailed follow-up question. I'm sure these guys have got lots and lots of things on their plate, so avoiding giving them extra work where we can, I think, is a good thing to do. Any other questions or observations? No? Okay. In that case, the recommendation to Audit Committee is that members note the contents of this report. Is everyone happy to note the report? Yes. Okay, super. Moving on to agenda item 6, counter fraud.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I just do apologise. This is by way. If with your permission, I'll leave now. That's the end of my item. And I'm not sitting at the front as I often do for these committees, but as monitoring officer, I just wanted to draw your attention to the gold papers for the deep dive item. And I think there are matters in there which are okay, so we may be touching on papers which have been published, numbers which have been published in gold papers as part of the deep dive. I think I may have a preview of some of the information which may be relevant. If we could avoid discussing anything which is included in papers which have been published as gold papers for other committees, that would be valuable. If it is necessary to go into those numbers, then we may well have to go into, or you may well have to go into private session. And that would mean the exclusion of the public, which I don't think there are any, and the YouTube. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yep. Okay, so that was contrived between us very quickly in the minutes before the meeting started, as you might have noticed. So for the last agenda item on the deep dive, a number of us, most particularly me, asked a lot of questions. Unfortunately, that's put Detlef to a good deal of work, and to answer them, included in which is producing a bunch of gold paper information, which is going to get distributed to you, and indeed to me. I haven't seen it yet either. When we get to that item, and so Martin's just reminding us that that it is gold papers, and the way we like to work to make this as productive a session as possible without having to go out of, sort of turn the YouTube off, is to talk about the themes and talk about the line items without referring to numbers. And if people think that's not practical and that we do need to talk about the numbers, then we'll obviously have to go into private session. But I think it would be better if we could avoid doing that. Anyway, so Martin, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Have a safe journey home.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Harrison, have you got? You'd like Martin to stay?
No, not necessarily. No, but no. always, Chair. No, sorry, Chair, to be a nuisance. Being new to audit, there's lots of faces around the room I don't know, and it may become apparent during the meeting, but I know certainly on the front row. Oh, I'm not the only one. Maybe an introduction. Sorry.
Okay, so that's a very good point, and I should also start off by saying, welcome to new members of the committee. I think it's one of, if not the most important committee in the council. So I asked the leader to give us the best possible members to sit on it, which is why you're all here, why you've been carefully selected. Actually, the gentleman sitting next to Charlie is David Dodds, and he is our new internal auditor. And I was going to ask him to do a personal introduction when we got to his first item. So are you all right to wait a couple of minutes, Councillor Harrison, or do you want to hear David's life story now? Is that okay?
That's fine.
David, are you happy to wait?
Yes, I can wait, Chair. Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Sorry, Chair, there are still others that I have got no idea. Sorry.
Point at the people that concern you, Councillor, and then we'll.
Well, I know Detlev, and then after that, I haven't got a clue.
Okay, so
of the three gentlemen and the two in the front.
Right,
I may have come
okay.
across them. Sorry.
No. Apologies. So, okay. So, Glenn Moore, you're going to hear from in a minute. He is going to present the counter fraud paper. Gufran sitting on my left and Paris sitting on my right are from Grant Thornton, our external auditors, and you're going to hear from them items 8 and 9, I think, or 9 and 10. At the front here, we have Stephen and Richard, who are the two external members of our committee. David is our new internal auditor, and he's going to introduce himself in a minute. Do you know Jess? Okay, Jess, and Jim? Excellent, okay. I'll tell you, in that case, what a shambles. Can I
apologise? Do you want me to leave?
Maybe you should be the chair, because you were really good at that last year. Okay, I'll tell you what, in that case, Steve and Richard, can I ask you to do quick personal intros for the 2 or 3 members of the committee that haven't met you before? Is that all right? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Richard Jackson. I've been independent member for maybe 18 months now. My background is external audit for 6 years, and then 12 years now of internal audit experience at different banks, and currently at UBS covering compliance.
Thank you.
I used to live in Sevenoaks. I've recently moved to Uckfield, but sorry.
Yeah, I'm Steve Thomas. I've been independent member for a year, Sevenoaks resident. Spent my career 26 years in the financial industry, working in risk management. So yeah, that's me.
Is that okay, Councillor Harrison?
Thank you so much, Chair.
No, sorry, it's just we've never had a question before. So
Thank you also, that was really helpful.
Thank you. Right, so we voted on item 5, didn't we? Yeah, okay, God's sake. Right, so counter fraud, agenda item 6, Glenn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the slightly revised format in my annual report this year. So firstly, the introduction of the referral analysis section on page 31. I hope it's page 31 on your script. So this section gives an in-depth review of the referrals received by the counter fraud team during 25-26, and explains in detail the area in which the team concentrates its resources. As you can see from the report, the team is relatively small in size, so every effort is made to concentrate the limited resources on areas that will benefit the local authority the most. Secondly, the introduction of the fraud action plan on page 36. So the 5 pillars are derived from the local government counter fraud and corruption strategy, which we refer to or is known as fighting fraud and corruption locally. And this should provide us a coordinated response to protecting the public purse. If I can refer to the cost benefit analysis, which is on pages 35 and 36, this shows that my team yielded a surplus, i.e. the benefits were greater than the running costs of my team. It should be noted that we are a shared service and Dartford Borough Council contributes a slightly higher proportion. It is a 58-42 split between the two authorities as their workloads are higher than ours. If I can confirm that it should be noted on page 34 within the business rate savings chart, there is a difference between the increase in tax yield and the increase in net revenue. Now, a majority of business rate savings are derived from identifying properties which are not currently rated to pay business rates. But in certain scenarios, we will find units that are so small that under exemption, government exemptions, they won't actually pay business rates. So it will increase the tax yield for the local authority, but the net revenue can be zero. And that's why I try to distinguish between the two. You will notice that there is a substantial drop between 24 and 25-26 in terms of business rates, in terms of increase in net revenue. An explanation for this is that we have been conducting this type of work for, I think last year was our 8th year. So we started in 2018, 2019 to try and find properties that weren't paying business rates. I can thankfully say we're running out of properties that are not hiding under bushes or etc. etc. We are literally getting down to the nitty gritty. I'm hoping now that they're literally referred to as hereditaments. I'm hoping that Sevenoaks has got all of the hereditaments that it needs to be on the rating list. And that is why the figures have dropped. So just some general information. My team gets referrals from various sources, information from the public, reports from internal staff, and internally we generate our own cases by data matching. So we are literally comparing two databases to highlight discrepancies. But no matter what the source of the referral, investigators will scrutinise that information before taking any action at all. So we don't pester the public until there is a identified discrepancy to further. A very simple example of the work that we do, and we run this exercise every year. So on the 1st of December every year, a new voters register is published, and we compare that data with all of the council tax single person discount claims. So what we're looking for is, obviously, if you live on your own, if you're the sole adult of a property, you get a 25% council tax discount. So we're literally looking for where there's two people on voters. We will scrutinise that award. In terms of the work we do, cases where monetary values exceed 10,000, we will seriously consider for legal action. Members of the public can report concerns on the council's fraud hotline, of which details are found on various places within the website. But you can also email us 24 hours a day at investigations@sevenoaks.gov.uk. Very popular subject is AI. AI is already assisting investigation teams to highlight fraud. Some of the data matching technology we use, which is derived from external companies, will employ algorithms that will indicate that one case is of a higher risk than another. So it gives us a pecking order. Happy to answer any questions about the report or the work that we do, Mr. Chair.
Glenn, thank you very much for the sort of elaborations that you provided there on how residents can assist you and how you're using AI. I'm sure that's a question that would occur to lots of people when they're thinking about how you use data to best advantage. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Skinner.
So thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. One on the cost benefit analysis. I'm not sure I quite understand the figures. So total pounds and SDC pounds. Could you just tell me what the two columns refer to?
So as I explained, Councillor Skinner, that we are a shared service.
Sure.
So
the second is simply a proportion of the first.
Yes, it's Sevenoaks' element. Most of them will be 52, 48.
Thank you.
Sorry, 58, 42.
And on the deterrent factor, which I'm interested in, so where it says £42,000 for the deterrent factor, that's the amount of money that you think you've saved by being in place, by existing.
Yes, so one of the very large exercises that the Cabinet Office run for local government is called the National Fraud Initiative. Yeah. Now, within their results screens, they actually they will request a weekly amount of fraud purposely to find out what 104 times that figure is, and so when you next see the NFI have saved you £2 billion, part of that money will be a future element.
Right.
What they're saying is that, yes, we've stopped single person discount now, but we predict that it could have gone for at least 2 years.
So that refers to found fraud, if you like.
It's future fraud.
Future fraud, but from if you hadn't found it, the fraud would have continued.
Yeah, if my team hadn't intervened, we're predicting that it could have gone for, it could have gone on for 10 years. But
what I'm getting at is that this deterrent factor doesn't cover, as I understand it, people who say, oh, the counter fraud team exists, therefore I'm not going to be fraudulent in the first place.
That's, in my opinion, that's extremely difficult to calculate.
I think it's very hard to calculate, or probably impossible to calculate, but I think it's nevertheless a very important reason for your existence. And I think that the fact that you're there will give people second thoughts about actually trying to play the system.
Yes.
And I think that's, so I wonder if that should be mentioned at some stage.
It's purely mirroring the National Fraud Initiative.
No, I understand. So this isn't the criticism, and I understand you're following that. I'm just saying that in addition to all of this, the very fact that you're there means that people are going to say, well, actually, I'm not going to try this on because I could get caught. My second question, if I may, is just to get a feel for This is all concerned with Sevenoaks and Dartford. Are we good? Are we bad? Where are we in any kind of? Do we have a lot of fraud? Do we have a small amount of fraud? I don't have a sense here whether there's a big issue in the district.
It's very difficult for me to answer that question. We are part of a Kent fraud hub, and not to blow our own trumpet, we do very well in comparison to the other Kent authorities. If I had a crystal ball, I could probably find out every piece of single fraud I don't know, it's difficult. We are a very small team, and that's why I generally produce the cost benefit analysis to show that we are paying for ourselves.
Could you blow, so through you, Chair, could you blow your trumpet for a bit? Could you explain how much better we are than other districts in Kent?
So on a quarterly basis, all of the Kent authorities will submit their council tax savings, their business rate savings and various savings. Sevenoaks is usually in the top 3 out of there'll be 12 local authorities, and Dartford is the same.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I guess it's difficult if we have a population of law-abiding citizens who are all paying their council tax, then there'd be no one for Glenn to catch. If there's a small number who aren't, then there's a small number who are available for him to catch, and hopefully he catches a big proportion of those. So,
just to make a point on that, a lot of the cases we review are not fraud. They're not proven fraud. They are people that made a mistake. They've forgotten to report. I think the problem with council tax is that it is a self-reporting system. Now, a lot of things affect that. So cost of living, etc., etc. You get older. I'm sure if I get to 85, 90, you will forgive me for not telling you that someone has moved into my house. So this is not fraud, but I'm looking upon it as the residents' pound. That's what I'm trying to protect. So the vast majority of this is not fraud. It's not the Theft Act or something like that. It's purely that we want that money to pay for vital local services.
Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Glenn, I don't see anything in relation to employee fraud or pensioner fraud from Sevenoaks Council. If your team doesn't do it, do you know who would be looking into those?
So employee fraud would be my colleagues in internal audit, but we would offer our assistance in any financial investigation. Pension, you said pension fraud.
Yeah, so former employees of Sevenoaks District Council, so kind of ghost pensioners have died, family members are still claiming their pension, those type of things.
So again, that would come under the National Fraud Initiative exercise. So every 2 years, Sevenoaks submits all of its employee data to a national exercise. So everything is compared, and it is compared against the death register. So again, if you had died, we would quickly identify through the National Fraud Initiative that you had died. It's run every 2 years, and it's due to start in October, with the referrals come out in December.
Steve.
If I read this correctly, it sounds like the benefit to the council outweighs the cost for your team. And you also mentioned you have a very small team. If you had a bigger team, would the benefit increase exponentially or in line, or do you think you're actually catching all the fraud you potentially could?
I think the problem with that is that unfortunately my team generates work for other teams, primarily business rates, council tax, potentially benefits. So you're pushing that work on to very overstretched teams already, and that's the problem. You'd probably, yes, the simple answer is if I had more investigators, we would find more fraud, but it's a balancing act. You want a good service from your council tax team and from your business rates team, but if fraud comes along and says you need to look at 500 reports today, they're going to say, no, that's not feasible. It is a balancing act of if we send 500 letters out to residents, we know we're going to get a wave of work coming back. So it's always a balancing act in that respect.
So Glenn, the first question I raised with you, and I'm not seeking to to promote a Big Brother style society, but what could the parish councils or what could residents do to help you make your life easier or to make the council tax raising process more productive?
I think it is word of mouth mainly. If people hear people boasting down the pub or wherever that, oh, I'm getting away with this or I'm getting away with that, they can report it through the ways that I've already explained. I think the future is technology. It's possibly AI will come along. I know for a fact that the Department for Work and Pensions are already using AI to look at their caseload and find the most high risk frauds. But it's difficult for the public. Do the public know that you're claiming something from the council unless you actually say to them, I'm claiming it, but I'm claiming it incorrectly? The best thing to do is speak to us, report it. We can't tell you what we're doing in the background, but we will check it, make sure that the awards or the exemptions or the discounts are valid, and then tick it off and go on to the next thing. You're not, it's a gut, I had a meeting today and it was a gut feeling. If you've got a gut feeling, just report it to us. We'll check it for you. We can't tell you what we're doing or what the result is. It's all confidential, but report it to us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Would our residents know about the fraud service? Do we ever put it in shape?
We have in the past, not recently. We have done pieces for publication before.
Is that something you'd do again in the near future?
We can do. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, let's discuss that with Councillor Maskell in the context of all the other things that that quite rightly and importantly need to be in shape. I do think it's a good idea to give you the opportunity to blow your trumpet, as Councillor Skinner suggested, but also to tell people or tell residents or remind residents that the investigations hotline service is there. And if people aren't paying their fair share, then they're depriving the council of the funding it requires to pay for leisure and housing and what have you. So let's pick that up with Councillor Maskell. Okay. Any others? Any other questions? No. In that case, can I recommend to the Audit Committee that members note the work of the counter fraud and visiting team carried out during the year to 31st March 2026. Everyone happy with that? Yes, good. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to add my congratulations on covering costs. Always a good thing.
Thank you very much.
Right. Agenda item 7, external audit progress report, regaining assurance strategy and final audit plan. Paris, could you could you just do a quick personal introduction as well, Paris and Gufran, for the benefit of people who haven't met you before? Thank you.
Absolutely. So thanks, Chairman. Evening, everyone. My name is Paris Williams. I'm a director at Grant Thornton.
Turn the mic on, please, Paris.
Oh, maybe just speak into it, I think. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a director at Grant Thornton. I've been doing the external audit here at Sevenoaks for the last 3 years, so since 23-24. I have 4 district councils across Kent. I've also got the Kent Pension Fund and other clients, but I suppose those are quite relevant. And I've been doing this job for 14 years. I'm going to hand over to Gufran to do the heavy lifting in terms of taking you through the 3 reports. He's authored them, so it's quite right that he takes you through them. I do want to mention one thing. Obviously, Sevenoaks District Council, like many other councils up and down the country, are in a sort of a disclaimed position in terms of the opinion. And like, you know, for committee members who have been with us for the last sort of 2 or 3 years, they've been through that journey. For new committee members, you're now joining that journey. It's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit complex, but that's okay. It's right that you ask questions. But what I would also say is that we've got a lot of information already that's been coming to these committees. So if it's helpful, we can always share them again just to get you up to speed. On the agenda here, we do have the Regaining Assurance Strategy, which is our attempt to try and give it as much life and make it as clear both to you, but also we have to submit that to MHCLG as part of our return. So I would just encourage questions if there are any. It is quite complicated stuff, but we're happy to sort of answer questions there. I'll pause and hand over to Gufran.
Thank you. As an introduction, my name is Gufran Ahmed, and I have been in the audit profession for more than 10 years now. And as auditor of Sevenoaks, it's my 3rd year. So yes, I've been with Paris throughout this journey and with the audit committee members who have been here. So yeah, so that was basically a brief introduction about me. So we have 3 reports today that we have in the agenda, namely audit progress in sector update report, final audit plan, and the regaining assurance strategy report. All of these 3 reports were agreed with the management, and I would take these reports as read for the purpose of this meeting. Therefore, I'll focus on the main points. Firstly, I will talk about the audit progress and sector update report and final audit plan, which is given from page 41 onwards of the agenda pack. The progress report confirms that there has been no change in the risk assessment previously communicated to the audit committee in April. Hence, the final audit plan has been produced in these papers for the purpose of completeness. As discussed in April 2026, in response to the accelerated statutory backstop deadlines, we introduced a 4-week phase 0 period that commenced on 15th of June for all of our local government clients. The purpose of phase 0 is to undertake sample selection in advance of the main audit fieldwork. Sevenoaks falls into phase 2 category of our clients, which starts from mid of September all up to the and goes up to the end of November. And our aim was to complete sample selection during phase 0, provide sufficient time for the finance team to collate and submit supporting evidence by mid-September. The approach is intended to ensure that when the final audit commences, we can complete our testing efficiently and issue the audit finding report and audit opinion by the end of November. This report that you find in agenda was prepared at the start of June, and at that time we were going to start phase 0. Now that we are in the 4th week of phase 0, so I'll give you a quick update of where we have reached to. Under the phase 0 approach agreed with the management, a number of key listings and working papers were scheduled to be provided by 15th of June to enable early sample selection ahead of the receipt of draft accounts. The remaining information was due to be provided alongside the draft financial statements, which were expected on 30th of June, which was the statutory deadline for the accounts. While some of the information due by 15 June was received a bit later than planned, however, we have been able to select samples across most of those areas. The draft accounts were received subsequently on 3rd of July, which was 3 days later than the statutory deadline of publication of accounts. Some of the working papers due with the draft accounts, including fixed asset register, inventory working papers, and IFRS 16 assessment, has been received and are under review. Whereas there are few working papers that management is still working on that includes operating expenses and fees and charges. And that is due to the legacy issues of cleansing of the listing that we have been discussing with the audit committee. In addition, the closing trial balance and the full transaction listing for the year, which originally was planned to provide by 15th of June, was not received until the draft accounts, and it was kind of rescheduled because management was still finalizing that. And as a result, the sample selection that we have done is currently based on management assertion that the underlying listings that we have received were reconciled to the draft financial statement, which we still have to verify, which we'll be doing as part of our main audit procedures. Overall, it has been a positive in comparison to how we have been in the audit in previous years. So, yeah. We have been providing weekly progress update to the Section 151 officer for the last 3 weeks, and we'll be providing again one this Friday. We intend to report our findings for 25-26 in November 2026 meeting and issue our audit opinion thereafter. Other than that, this document explains sector-wide updates for the audit committee to note. I would pause there, and if you have any questions for this, I'm happy to take that, and then I'll come to the regaining assurance strategy report.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gufran. Thank you, Paris. If you will forgive me, I'm going to go back to the results, if you like, the main lines from the last report, and ask you to what extent you think there's been improvement. I hope there's been improvement in all of them, but how far along we are, or maybe some of them haven't started. So when I went through the report from last year's, to me, there were 7 accounting lines that you said required improvement, which also have a significant effect on control system or financial statements. And those 7 were the deficiency in the closed down and financial reporting process, which obviously is a very global point. There was the fixed asset register. There was the reconciled working paper for capital financing requirements, which is really important to us, given that there are some major capital projects being discussed right now. And again, with capital projects, fourthly, the minimum revenue provision calculation was another one you mentioned that you said needed improvement. Then there was the underlying source data and other work papers for the valuation of land and buildings and investment properties. And then there were 2 smaller ones, which personally, I'm not an accountant, but I'm less worried about, is the cleansing of the transaction listing for short-term debtors and the accounting for IFRS 16, which we know is a headache, and it's a headache for everybody, and I don't have questions about that. But for the first 5, I'd be really interested in how you think things are moving from last year to this year. Thanks. What shall I go back and listen again? Sorry, I gabbled through that, didn't I? If you want me to repeat.
Then I think I'll start, and then if I miss anything, please let me know. Okay. Thank you for the question. In terms of the FAR, fixed asset register, we have received that this year, which is, I think 2 days ago, we have received the reconciled FAR. We are yet to review whether it's actually reconciled to the financial statements or not. So we are yet to perform our procedures, but yes, we have received the report, which was not prior to us in the last 2 years. So that is a positive. In terms of the valuation bit that you mentioned, underlying data related to it, since that is a process that we're going to go through in the main audit, when we select the samples and then we test that, it is quite early to say where we are with that. Then comes capital financing requirement and MRP. Again, that is something that we'll be picking up as part of our main audit. It was because phase 0 was primarily focused on sampling, and MRP and CFR has not got sampling in it. So that is something that we're going to pick in our main audit. Is there anything that I missed? I think you mentioned about debtors and creditors. So for debtors and creditors, we have received the listings and we have selected the sample and shared with the management. However, as I mentioned, because we were doing sampling on the listing that we have received, but we haven't reconciled to the draft financial statements because we received the listing before the draft financial statements. And we did the sampling on the assumption that the numbers are reconciled, and that's what management has explained to us. So we're going to look through the reconciliation as later part of our stage, audit, later stage of our audit, and that would be mid-September primarily. So yes.
Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, that sounds as though it's all quite good news that phase 0 is going well.
So as any good auditor, I would like to not fetter my final view on these sorts of things. As part of our audit findings report, we will of course look at all of our internal control recommendations and have a view. My general sense is if you think about phase 0, we're asking for information ahead of the statutory deadline. Okay, so we're asking all of our clients to deliver by the 15th of June. Not all of them have. Okay, so in that sense, we're able to do a lot more work than we've ever done before. So this is stuff that we haven't done before. Have we done all of it? Maybe not, but it's still a hell of an improvement from where we were last year, and that can only be done with the contribution of management to not only produce the accounts, but also all of that information. So from that side, I am encouraged, but I still keep my counsel in terms of having a final view in terms of where things are.
So may I continue? Absolutely understand, but it's possible, therefore, that although you will have to disclaim the accounts again because of the opening balances, closing balances, that you will not be disclaiming because of in-year transactions. Is that a possibility? I'm not asking for a prediction, just a possibility.
So Gufran will come on to it. In our regaining assurance strategy, we do our best to go through where we think we will land in terms of the CIS or debtors and creditors and give it sort of a RAG rating. Forgive me, I'm a little bit cautious that I don't think we'll get, maybe 100% there in terms of, say, the I&E. But certainly we need to have a big improvement from where we were last year. So I think for 25-26, I may have rated that amber, for example. So I think it's that trajectory in terms of we've got to do a lot more. And you'll see in that regaining assurance strategy where we think we will land. Ultimately, and I think we'll come on to it, the minimum has to be by the time local government reorganisation comes along, that everything is green except for the reserves, which is more difficult to unlock. But that is the sort of the main trajectory.
Thank you. I look forward to continuing the conversation later in the meeting.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. So Paris, just to be clear, because I'm looking at page 69 here and now.
Come on to this.
Oh, have we not come on? Sorry, am I jumping ahead?
I think you are.
It's one of the appendices.
This is
Sorry, if I'm jumping
this is
ahead,
the
apologies.
regaining assurance bit, isn't it?
Yes, it's regaining assurance. Am I
We
jumping
should-
ahead?
Go
Yeah,
for
we're
appendix,
doing one
please.
appendix at a time.
Calm yourself.
I will.
Calm yourself.
I will calm down and wait. Thank you.
It's a good appendix.
Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Gufran, probably the bit I was probably most nervous about is the breakdowns and the reconciliations back to the accounts. So the debtors and creditors, if you're picking samples under the assumption things will tie back to the accounts. If you've picked your sample, is there a risk that the council will waste time pulling information, evidence that isn't required if you redo your sample and you find things aren't reconciled and you basically have to start again? Or even if things aren't reconciled, will that sample still be potentially suitable and then you might just have to do top up?
So I'll answer it with two things. First, where we have selected the sample already, and if the listing reconciles to the draft accounts, there might be an top up sample because the revised in materiality, because currently we have used planning materiality and we're moving to final materiality with the numbers that we have got on the draft financial statements. So yes, there might be a top up. In terms of redoing the sampling, I think that is not currently that we are hoping to go for. But it depends on how material the reconciling items are, if there are any. And if we can test them as one-off items, then we might not have to redo any sampling. Or if there are material reconciling items, we might have to do some top up to get assurance over those reconciling items. So that's the approach that we're going to take.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. So on this appendix, we are page 51. Am I still in, I'm in the right place, I hope. Sorry, normally I separate out my appendices before coming. So you refer to, and I'm sorry, Jessica, but we do have this at every meeting. It's the capacity constraints in the finance team. And I accept that, which is not anything for you to deal with. But you also mentioned what you've called limitations in accounting systems and processes in producing auditable information without significant manual intervention. Is this about the Aggresso system? Is it something like that? Is it something that can be addressed? Is it something we're stuck with? Is this going to come back every year? Does anyone have any thoughts? Because it does seem a shame in these days to have to do a lot of manual work. Thank you.
I'll take that if I may, Chair. Some of it is to do with kind of getting the information out of the system and yeah, kind of getting the sort of cleanse listings we've talked about. Some of that is tied up in balances brought forward, and we've worked very hard to clear historic balances to make sure that the in-year transactions, that the kind of new balances are made up of in-year transactions or known kind of transactions, because obviously some things have to go across more than 1 year. But yeah, we've had an upgrade of the system, and yeah, we are looking at reports and the sort of outstanding listings that Gufran mentioned. We are working on getting those out of the system and trying to use the system better for that. So hopeful that we can make improvements.
Wish you all the luck, as well as I know it's hard work, but also wish you good luck.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. On page 52, in the final paragraph, you explain why you think there's going to have to be disclaimed accounts again. Part of the explanation is the absence of agreement to undertake additional regaining assurance work in 25-26. I didn't quite understand that. So in the second line, and the absence of agreement to undertake additional regaining assurance work.
So for that one, in the current year, the focus is to do the in-year transaction and the closing balances. However, the work on the opening balances, which will unlock some of the assurance on the reserves, that is something that would be very early on to do, because there are things to be sorted out before we can actually go to that. So that is something that has not been agreed at this stage with the management to work on, as we have to work through the in-year transaction and the closing balances. So once we are there, then we will plan to work around recovering the assurance. And that's something that Paris was saying that would be unlikely before 27-28. If at all we come to a stage where we are able to unlock that, then we'll work to achieve that.
Well, I think it's slightly poor wording, if I may. I think the suggestion that we sort of said should we do this and management disagreed with us, that isn't true. I think throughout this journey we've been in lockstep in terms of saying what is the best course of action to give as much assurance as possible. So yeah, I agree with you that the wording there is slightly isn't not right.
So, Councillor Skinner, thank you, because I had the same question. So just to be 100% clear and picking up on what I thought I heard good friend say, when you've done everything that you want to for this year, then you can start to look at the additional work around opening balances if time allows. Is that capacity allows? Is that the right understanding?
Yeah, so the process that MHCLG requires us to do is to do a risk assessment, a capacity risk assessment, which is included within the regaining assurance strategy. And as you can see there, we've placed the council in a position where we don't think at current stage an ISA compliant regaining assurance is viable because of the capacity constraints, because of the amount of work we need to do just to get through the in-year stuff. That can obviously change if things, drastically improve over this year. We can always revisit that risk assessment and say, well, okay, let's embark on this journey to do the additional work that's required. Again, that will be something that will be agreed with management and of course this committee. But as of our current risk assessment, based on what we know now, we think that's unlikely to be able to happen before local government reorganisation.
Okay, that's clear to me. Everyone happy with that? I was wondering if I should ask Jessica and Jim if they wanted to make any observations on what we've heard so far. No, I'm springing this upon them.
Not particularly, except where I've interjected. Yeah, I've kind of got an update, by which time I'm sure Gufran and Paris will have said much of what I was going to say. So we've kind of got a dual approach, but yeah, no, happy to come in to expand on any particular points that are made. But
Right, thank you. In that case, can we go to the second appendix, please?
Thank you. So for the Regaining Assurance Strategy Report, MHCLG and PSAA have jointly requested additional information from us for the authorities subject to the assurance build back process, including a capacity assessment prepared with input from both our team and the council's management. We are therefore presenting a report setting out the proposed strategy for regaining assurance for the committee's consideration. This report has been agreed with the management, and our submission to the MHCLG is due by end of this month, 31st of July. MHCLG has given 4 categories in which our local councils are categorized, as summarized on page 68. Based on that, Seven Oaks fall within category D, which as per the recent revised guidance is now known as category C, and the category C on the report is now category D. So there's an interchanging over there. What that essentially means is that we might be able to regain assurance over the assets and liabilities by 27-28, depending on how the audits go. However, we are unlikely to build assurance over the reserves by 27-28. Hence, the audit opinions will still be a disclaimer of opinion. However, it will somewhat positive position to be in sense that there would be assurance over the value of assets and liabilities that gets merged into the new unitary authority. However, it is important that the technical challenges within the accounts, together with the finance team capacity constraint and the limitation in the council's accounting system and processes, are resolved in order to produce the auditable listing in work papers for us to achieve assurance over the assets and liabilities. Members will recall we reported a significant weakness in the council's closed down financial reporting arrangements as part of our 24-25 value for money work. We'll continue to assess that as part of our current year value for money work, and we will report our finding in November. Yeah, so happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, I think we've broadly understood, the sort of the challenges we face in terms of our accounts, and and the extent to which they're disclaimed, why they're disclaimed, and I think we've broadly understood the process to move towards accounts that are that are qualified. It's certainly took me quite a long time to get that level of understanding, and I'm an accountant, so I sympathise with other people who aren't. But I think that sort of preamble is all to say that that this report is really clear. It's it's not extremely happy reading, but it's very clear. So thank you very much to to yourselves for presenting it to us. So with that being said, any questions from the committee? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm now on page 69. So I know it's written down, but I just want to be absolutely clear. At the current trajectory, you believe it will take another 2 years of accounts before, in the third one, we have the potential for a full opinion just on the in-year transactions, because we have the double problem, don't we? It's the inheritance from the past, But currently, we also have the problem of the in-year transactions. So you think it'll take another 3 audits? I'm not going to pin you to that. It's fine, but it's just currently from where you are now, you think it'll take another 3 years-ish. And then I have a quick question afterwards.
Yeah, page, I think it's 71 of the pack, which has the 3 different years and the greens and the ambers. That's our best attempt at sort of setting the scene. It's cautious, as you can imagine, we would be as auditors. I think given the challenges and the number of control findings, you know, it's not something that I expect to be all resolved in 1 year. That would be quite heroic in order to do that. But we are expecting each and every year for there to be improvement, and more assurance can be built back or built from where we are to a point at the end of before local government reorganisation, where, for example, your CIS, PPE, pensions, other asset liabilities, everything apart from the classification of reserves. And you know, that's something that we're going to work, you know, extremely closely with management. That's, you know, I think that's the right thing to do. It's not to say that we won't do the work on reserves. As I said, our risk assessment is live. We can always change, and you know, we've now got a full process in terms of what that work would entail. It is quite a lot of work, but you know, that's work that can be done. So I don't want to sit here and say we won't do it. That isn't our approach. I absolutely would love to do it, but it just has to be right, because we don't want to scupper our plans to be able to regain the assurance on the in-year transactions and the closing balances. With this regaining assurance strategy, we can bring this back each and every year to give you sort of that view as to, did we achieve that? Did we do better? Or, you know, so that helps set the scene, hopefully, for everybody.
Thank you very much, Paris. I have one little quick question, and it sounds frivolous, but I was gutted I couldn't come to your seminar 2nd of July because I was traveling. Is there somewhere I can watch it on catch up? Because, yeah, thank you.
So that session would have been recorded. I'll check internally if there's a link for that, which I can forward you. Yeah.
Again, I had the same question. So if you could share it with all the committee or with Democratic Services, and who can share it on with, that would be great. Thank you. Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with you in one sense that it's not happy reading, but in another sense, again, I agree with you. I think it's fantastic to have this set out very clearly as to the process that we're going to go through. And like you, I really like the clarity of this. I've got a couple of questions for me. The first is to Jess, actually. And how do you feel about this? I mean, because our auditors think it's doable, but what does it feel like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I seem to love a challenge. So yeah, it's, you know, we work very well with Grant Thornton. You know, as Paris and Gouffran say, they've been on this journey with us for 3 years so far. And you know, we've been engaging with them through the process. Obviously, this year the focus is on improving, and you know, the real feeling is we've achieved that, or certainly my feeling is we've achieved that, and the signs are good. Obviously, they can't say too much, but you know, the signs are good in terms of where we're going. So yeah, it's, you know, I think you're right. It doesn't make happy reading in some ways. You'd kind of hope we'd get further, but I'm always an optimist on these things. So yeah, and there's a lot of work in there, but we're making good progress.
And are you getting all the support and resource that you need? Is there anything that we can do to shake the tree for you?
Yes, we've got. We took on the accountancy manager role back end of last year, and she has been instrumental in some of the improvements that we've made this year and some of the things that we've managed to deliver, including unlocking the fixed asset reconciliation. So, so yes, but we do have a role that we haven't been able to recruit to, which is out to advert again. So we've got the budget approved. It's just about finding the right person for that kind of technical role. And then obviously with Adrian moving on, although he's continuing to support us a couple of days a week going forward, which is a big support, we are looking to backfill some elements of my old head of finance role. So we've actually got 2 adverts out at the moment. So we're hopeful. We've got interviews scheduled for the end of the month. So we're hopeful to find somebody.
And
Councillor Skinner.
I have one more question, if I may. This is looking at your RAG rating year by year, and just for let's assume that your forecasts are correct, and the 27-28 audit comes out like that. As I understand it, assuming that LGR goes ahead, then that is passed to the new unitary authority for them to continue working on it. How big a task is that likely to be? I mean, how much of a problem is that going to be for the unitary authority? Clearly, they're going to have to put some resource into it, but can you give us an idea of the scale of what that would look like?
I don't think I'm going to do as, I'm not going to be able to give you as clear an answer. What I can say is I think it is right that, this audit committee, ourselves and management work as much as we can to make sure that all the assets, liabilities, the I&E, that is inherited by the new authority. That gives it its best chance. It's going to have to consolidate 3, 4, who knows how many sets of accounts from different accounting systems. And to have assurance on that opening position is going to be really, really key. There's lots of other challenges to go alongside that. But I mean, if you're inheriting a lot of things which you don't have assurance over, you're already onto a losing game. The reserve scenario, I think, is slightly above my pay grade, quite frankly, in terms of how that will be resolved. There will, I think, when it comes to LGR, several authorities that do have this uncertainty in terms of its reserves. Clearly, when you get consolidated to a larger authority, materiality plays a part. So are the reserves inherited by Sevenoaks material to the new authority? That's an important question. There's also possibility of deemed opening balances which government might enact. That I have no, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's still to be resolved. I think what's really key to note is that MHCLG and it will be the LAO in the future are holding audit firms to account strongly for delivering on regaining assurance. I think it's important for them, and they're really asking questions about, well, what are you doing about it, and really pushing us as well as councils to do as much as possible. And I think that's the right thing to do. I'm keen to regain as much assurance as possible. The strategy put forward is in my view the right thing to do for this council. And as I said, if things are far better, we can revisit this and look to try and unlock those reserves. But
what this means is that for the first 4 rows there, the issues outside of reserves, it's really essential that we do everything we can to get those sorted.
Absolutely.
I think that's quite a helpful steer for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grint.
Thank you, Chairman. Could you explain succinctly, for the benefit of the audit committee members, what are the particular problems with auditing the reserves?
So it's not on. Hello? Is it on? Yeah. So the reserves for the council, I think it's fair to say, are probably the most important balances. Your general fund, for example, is probably the most important balance, because it really dictates, decisions around council tax and those sorts of things, the level of reserves that you hold. those reserves balances, if you think about sort of a typical profit and loss account for sort of a commercial entity, it's the cumulative impact of all the income transactions and expenditure transactions in that year. It's sort of the net impact, cumulative running total. If we haven't audited the income and expenditure for 4 years, that net total becomes sort of an uncertainty for us. So what is the true value of the general fund is a question I quite honestly don't know the answer to, having not had the assurance of that I&E testing for those 4 years. If we are to go back and try to regain that, it's about what level of testing do I need to do in order to be assured that there isn't a material misstatement within any of those reserves, not only in terms of its totality, but also the classification between them. Local authority accounts include lots of transfers between reserves and usable to unusable, sort of MRP or say depreciation. So there's lots of transactions that are sort of adjustments between them, which again, we haven't audited, any one of which could materially under or overstate your general reserve, which is a really important reserve. So it's the number of sort of reserve transactions that happen every year, plus also that I&E impact, which means, and those are quite highly material figures, and therefore that's why there's a lot of work to do in order to regain the assurance. I don't know if that's as succinct as you wish, Councillor.
Could I ask, at what point in time did we have a clear understanding and Grant Thornton were happy with the statement of reserves? If we go back 10 years, for example, we were getting clean audit reports at that stage. So I presume that yourselves as auditors were happy that the reserves were correctly stated at that time. What is it that's happened in the period since 10 years ago, let's say, that has caused this now to be a problem?
I mean, I wasn't the auditor personally during the period. I can speak generally about some of the reasons why many authorities like Sevenoaks have got into a position of sort of a disclaimer opinion. It's multifactorial, it's different at different councils. So there could be a single issue which sort of meant that the accounts couldn't be signed off. And the minute you miss a rotation of an audit, you're playing catch up, and there just isn't enough capacity to do 2 audits in 1 year. And I think many authorities got into that position. There was also an issue around infrastructure assets, which sort of put a moratorium on signing opinions. That was a technical issue. I don't think that impacted this council. I don't think you hold infrastructure assets. There was also an issue around pensions, another single issue which happened, which sort of put a pause on audits being signed and which created a delay. So I can certainly go away to sort of identify exactly why, but it would have been a case where a single set of accounts, the work wasn't complete for whatever reason. And under the old system, you couldn't start the next audit until the last one was sort of finished. The backstop was the sort of government put in place a legislation that said, it doesn't matter where you've got to in terms of the audit, you now issue an opinion and you start afresh the new audit. So that was the whole purpose of, hence why we sort of issued all the disclaimers, and now we're sort of starting with the current year. I can certainly sort of ask colleagues back in Grant Thornton exactly the precise rationale.
Councillor Grint.
Going further, is the issue with auditing the reserves, is it a question of the classification? And I know we've got a large number of different reserve accounts. Is it a question of the classification of reserves between those different? That's the issue, or is it the aggregate size?
Technically, I would say the biggest risk is around the classification of reserves. Yeah.
From my auditing days, from many entities which are being audited, I would say the reserves is simply the balancing figure in the accounts. If you've audited all of the assets and all of the liabilities, happy with all of those, then the reserves just drops out as a balancing figure. So I'm struggling to understand what's the particular difficulty.
Yeah, no, You raise an important question. As I said, it's primarily some of those transactions, the classification of reserves, which is our primary concern. There's so many transactions that go through the capital adjustment account, which is an unusable reserve, versus the general reserve. So your normal and profit and loss will fall out, and one could do sort of balance sheet reconciliations. And part of the regaining assurance is about testing some of those reconciliations, making sure they sort of balance, which can sort of give you assurance in that sense. But some of the other sort of transfers between reserves, MRP transactions, let's say you sold something, so you should have sent it to the capital receipts reserve. If you didn't get that quite right in that year, that your capital receipts reserve would be wrong forevermore. So you'd need to go back and test the disposals in those years to get the capital receipts, because it's possible that you could have sold it and generated a different capital receipt, but didn't apply it to the capital receipts reserve account, which again would be could introduce a material misstatement. So I think what I'm trying to say is not the totality of reserves, which is the main concern, but the classification between them. And they could be materially misstated between, for example, a usable reserve and an unusable reserve, which is quite important.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Skinner.
Just very briefly, of all the issues, you did mention COVID as a possible issue for on the accounts. I had understood that that was one which had affected a lot of councils.
Yes, quite right. Yeah.
Any other questions on Richard?
Thanks, Chair. Who's ultimately responsible for deciding what can be done to get all councils back on track? I'm thinking more from kind of the accounting standards. Is it a SIPFA vision, or will it be a CLG, or sorry, I don't know who the new CLG is.
Yeah, so SIPFA, I mean, they set the sort of the accounting framework, and that doesn't change. So there's no plans to change that for disclaimer. I suppose the real point which firms have been sort of wrestling with is the technical auditing that is required under the auditing standards in order to move yourself from a disclaimed opinion to a true and fair. It's quite an important, it's quite novel. It doesn't happen every day. So there's obviously quite an element of risk with that. And, there isn't necessarily a sector leader. I mean, there's been lots of reports into at this stage, there is not necessarily a sector leader that is able to bring all of those things together and own it and say, well, this is the approach. MHCLG are doing their best, and they've given some guidance in terms of LARIGs and things like that, which the firms are using. And that they've given a sort of a guidance in terms of regaining assurance, which our firm have sort of absorbed. And now we've got a process by which we can enact that where we feel that the capacity is fine. So we're doing that for the first year this year with several authorities that are in that sort of the A or B category. And we'll see, hopefully that works out quite well. But there will be the establishment of the local audit office, who will assume responsibility for driving and taking ownership and being a sector leader in terms of that. I think that's really important. They will also have powers in terms of inspections. We are also being reviewed, but not in a sort of a scored review, but just in terms of approach to some of our early regaining assurance work. And some of those findings will be helped to share. As I said, for the entire sector, we're in sort of uncharted territory. So there's lots of discussions amongst the firms about what's the best way to go forward. We've now developed our approach to regaining assurance, and that's part of this. If you're in sort of the A or B category, there will be another detailed reserves strategy alongside it. We obviously haven't done that, given that we're not moving to that stage just yet.
Any other questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. It's less a question, more a suggestion for us to consider. I do think this particular appendix is a fantastically clear report. And I wondered what you thought, Chair, and maybe the other members of the committee, whether we forward this to council so that all councillors get a chance to see what the plans are, where we're going, when it's likely to achieve things. Because you see, we don't meet until November, whereas which is quite a long way away, but there is a council meeting in October. And I wondered, I think I'd like other councillors to have the chance to know this.
I'd welcome your.
Just this appendix, the
Yeah,
11 pages.
I'd welcome your input, Jim. I guess my thoughts are if we were sharing it with council for information, you know, I can see the value in that. What I would be reluctant to do is to have a mid-year extended discussion and debate about issues that we discussed and debated comparatively recently, and we're going to get an opportunity to discuss and debate again in the not too distant future. So that's my immediate thought. Jim, any?
My suggestion is only that it is noted. I wouldn't just circulate it for information, or maybe we don't send it to council, we just send it to all councillors. After all, it's a public document. I just think it provides very good framework for people who are not on this committee to understand what's going on as an interim update.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that observation. I guess what I'm concerned about is that we sidetrack ourselves in a council meeting which are always, you know, very drawn out with overly full agendas, when, you know, we're going to get an opportunity to discuss this topic in detail in due course, I'm sure. So if we, you know, I'm certainly not against the information sharing. I think, you know, I think it's a great document, and it would be good to afford people the opportunity to receive it.
If I can, through you, Chair, just a couple of points. Obviously, as Councillor Robinson points out, this information is published as part of the agenda pack tonight, and I would imagine councillors read not only the papers for the committees, well, I'd like to think they would read not only the papers for the committees they sit on. So indeed, the information is available to all members. The other point, just as a logistical point, I point out the council meeting I think you're referring to is actually on the 1st of December. So it's after the next one of these audit committees, just in terms of timelines. There isn't one in October.
Maybe we can just circulate this appendix to councillors and tell them it's a jolly good read, and we'd recommend them to have a look at it, for fear that they might not find it in the audit pack, if we're just relying on their good offices to plough through, you know, all the papers that are circulated to all members. Is that okay? Charlie's nodded. Thank you. Councillor Bulford-Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. Follows on nicely to a question that might seem a little bit silly, but if you are going to forward it to all councillors, maybe an index for somebody. This is obviously quite a complex piece of work, and for somebody coming in, reading the papers and new to the committee, there's a lot of acronyms within it. So an appendix to sort of explain some of them would be really helpful, and I'm sure other councillors would probably feel the same if that's possible, please.
Okay, and Paris Guthrie, could I ask you to prepare a short sort of positioning note, explanatory note, so that people don't just find this in their inboxes and say, what's the bloody chair of audit up to? So they sort of to contextualize it for people, and to provide some helpful explanation of the acronyms, as Councillor Bulford-Lilly has suggested.
Normally, if you see the report, when we use an acronym, we kind of put the full name of it. So if there's an abbreviation given in the report, you will find the full name. For example, if you're saying MRP, you'll find minimum revenue provision. Now that's a standard term in the local authorities, and I think it's a matter of Google search. Okay? So it's more of like an open available information. If there's any specific acronym that you're concerned with, we're happy to explain in more detail what that means. But most of the terms that you will be finding over here are either from CIFA code, which is the accountancy code. So, and in that there's a glossary which you can basically glance through, and you will be able to find what those essentially mean.
if you're able to share any glossaries or anything you've got, that would be really helpful. In the headings, a lot of them then had their full name, but there was a lot referred to in the papers that
Yeah.
I didn't know what they were.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
If the choice is that you wish to share this document, we can certainly go through it again just to make sure if there's anything there that we can try and make it as clear for members. We will also, because we did this before MHCLG changed C and D, we will just change it to the new MHCLG terminology as well, just so you're aware, and we'll share it as a separate document, which might be easier. We can certainly do that.
That would be really helpful for somebody that doesn't come from a finance and accounting background. Thank you very much.
Though there are positions available in that world if you're thinking about retraining. So just so that we're clear, we're only talking about this appendix, and if you could produce a very short note, maybe it's only one paragraph that says, here's a paper that explains the journey going forward from disclaimed accounts to qualified accounts in due course, and just so that people understand what they're about to open. That would be great. Councillor Grint.
I just wanted to say I wouldn't be in favour personally of giving more information to the whole body of councillors and expecting them to understand what it is that we're saying. I think these issues are hard enough for the audit committee themselves to understand, and I rather dread the thought of other councillors more generally being asked to cast an eye over these matters, even if it's just for noting. That's my stance.
Yeah, and I gathered from your vigorous head shaking that that was your view. I'm happy to be hung up at the next council meeting and take responsibility for the decision. I do think that given the length and the intensity of discussion of our audit situation in previous council meetings, we should. I personally think that we are doing people, our fellow members, a service by providing them with this information. If some of them read it and they strongly disagree, then then they can speak to me outside afterwards. Right, moving on. Appendix C.
So Chair, we wasn't planning to present the audit findings report again. It's our final audit plan. There's no major changes from the indicative version that this committee's already seen. If there are any questions, we're happy to take it, but we're just sharing it just as for completion that we've now completed our risk assessment.
Yeah, so I should have said, I mean, that was kind of what I thought you might say, but I didn't want to deprive you of the opportunity. So for those who were previously on committee, you've basically seen this report before. There may have been some changes. I've got to say I didn't spot any. For new members, we did go through this in some detail previously. So any questions?
Just to mention one thing, I think on page 77 we have kind of summarized in terms of what's the change in the report in the final audit plan versus the indicated audit plan that we presented in April, which clearly says that there are no additional risks that we have identified. I think that will be a useful summary for that. We're happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question. I just wanted to say, I know it's early days, but I'd like to celebrate the fixed asset register being at least signed off at this end and sent to you for checking. I think I'd like to celebrate that moment. Thank you.
Feels to me a little bit like tempting fate, but those who want to celebrate should do so in their own time, and those who want to sit on their crossed fingers, then they should do that as well. Right, so recommendation to audit committee that the appendices are noted. Is everyone happy with that? Good, thank you very much indeed. Gentlemen, you're welcome to stay or feel free to go, and we won't say anything rude about you after you've left. Right, moving on, agenda item 8 is statement of accounts progress. Jess.
Yes, thank you. So as mentioned, I think because of the ordering of reports, we've mostly had spoilers on this. But this report has 3 purposes. The first is to set out the progress on the 25-26 accounts and audit. As already mentioned, the draft statement of accounts for 25-26 has been published and is now available on the council website. We were due to publish by the 30th of June, but unfortunately due to an unresolved issue with the primary statements, namely the CIS linking to the MERS, we were not in a position to publish on the 30th. So the publication date on our website was actually the 2nd of July, with papers shared with audit on the morning of the 3rd and transaction listing shared then too. So the report highlights the actions taken since the previous audit findings report to address the issues that highlighted, including engagement of LG Futures to assist with the collection fund, the additional resource of the financial accountant, which has now been advertised alongside another role, with the interview scheduled for the end of July, and the reconciliation of the fixed asset register, as mentioned, has been resolved and the workings have been provided. We've actively engaged with Grant Thornton throughout March and April, and from the middle of June, despite kind of balancing working on the accounts with working with them. So, but as I say, that's a productive relationship, and we're working well together. So the second part of the report seeks to set up the member working group, which will look more closely at the accounts. The members, some of the members of the committee have been on that before. So we would be looking for volunteers to be involved in that group, likely to review the accounts in September. So, got any volunteers, Chair?
Councillor Grint, Councillor Robinson. How many did we have last year?
Richard was there remotely. We do try and do it in person if we can, to do a literal page turn.
Oh, sorry, you're quite right, Councillor Skinner's in there.
It's,
Do we need an external member? Have we typically always had an external member?
I believe we have had an external member.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it again. My only concern is September too late?
Well, just in terms of kind of holiday season, we're obviously Grant Thornton will be back in mid-September reviewing the accounts, so changes can be fed into, the accounts are draft still at the moment, so.
Okay, so there's still sufficient time to add value before.
Yes.
So, okay,
Yes.
cool.
So Richard, thank you very much. Councillor Robertson, did I take that as a volunteering? Councillor Grint as well? I think that's sufficient. I don't want to deprive anybody of an opportunity. Vigorous head shaking going on, but I think that's probably enough, and I think probably any more than that would start to become a bit inefficient. So thank you very much for volunteering, everyone.
Thank you. And so the final report requests confirmation that the responses to the questionnaire in Appendix A are in line with the committee's knowledge, and whether the committee would have anything to add to that. So these are responses that were collated back when Jen was here. They've included input from Glenn from a fraud perspective, Jen from an audit perspective, Adrian before he left as 151. And these were shared with Councillor Malone and Councillor Grint ahead of time. I believe Councillor Grint had them as well. Certainly Councillor Malone saw them and sort of had agreed to them. They are questions that Grant Thornton sort of asked us. So to take any questions if anyone's got anything.
Any questions, anyone? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this information. I think it's the first time I've seen this. I've been on audit.
We did share it this time last year, or a
Ooh.
week earlier last year.
Oh, well.
It was an appendix last
A
year.
hole in my memory, as the French say. I just have some little questions. It's nothing major, and a couple of comments. Page 147. On the other than in-house solicitors, question 8, responses provided via inflow. Here is an acronym I have not yet come across. And what is the answer? Because it says, please indicate they're working on open litigation or contingencies from prior years. I don't know, or is this information you can't give because it's private?
Struggling to find the page in question. In answer to the question, inflow is the portal that we use to share information with the auditors. So we upload information via inflow to securely share documents with them. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. So the solicitors have been contacted and provided.
So on page 149, question 7, nearly papers. What is the CAE? The reviews all internal audits conducted. It's yet again, sorry to be foolish, I don't recognise the acronym.
Yeah, Chief Audit Executive.
Very grand. Right, thank you.
It's obviously one of Jen's acronyms. Thank you, David.
So this question might not be relevant to this box in this bit, but it is generally looking at fraud inquiries as a general thing. And it says they're asking about whether internal controls, might or might not be in place. Now, as I remember, previous audit reports, external audit reports, have raised the issue that not all officers necessarily have copies of the contracts. That at one point that was the case. They didn't always have a copy of the contract that they're supposed to be supervising. And I wondered if that had been resolved, because it seems to me that is something very important in avoiding any fraudulent action around the performance, particularly of a service, but also a goods contract. And I just wondered whether that has been resolved and all officers now have copies of contracts that they're supposed to be running. Thank you.
As far as I am aware, they would do, but I don't actually have the specific information relating to that item to hand.
It came up last year, the year before, as quite a significant, not last year, year before, quite a significant item. And the areas of potential for override, I do remember, maybe it was last year, that there was this business of head of finance, S151, could sign something, I cannot remember the details, could sign something off and there wasn't someone else to check them. I'm sorry, I don't speak like an accountant. But has that now been addressed? Because that was one of the ones where there wasn't a concern about override of control at the top somewhere. Sorry not to be, I should have looked it up, I should have quoted it, but there was that concern in last year's external auditor report. 2 years ago.
I think you are mentioning about the low-level control recommendation that we had in the AFR audit findings report. Yeah. So basically, that was so generally in different councils we see different control environments in terms of journals, and we try to recommend some best practices, which on our report you will see those marked as green. So it was a green recommendation where we said that I think Adrian had the access to the posting of the journals fairly, because it was kind of kept for the emergency purposes if in case others are not available. So I think we said generally we see this not being present in other councils. Well, it is not necessarily an issue. It is more of like for the management to have a have a think about whether it is appropriate for them, considering their size of the team and their journal control environment. We didn't necessarily find any issues with that. So that is, I think, what you were mentioning.
Thank you, Fran, for coming to the rescue. I really appreciate that. Page 151. I've got one more question, Chair, and then I'll be quiet for a little bit, or as long as okay. There's just a question at the top there, the very first question at the top, page 151, and I couldn't find a yes or a no answer. And I thought, given my past work, I'm really interested in the answer. Are you aware of any changes to the regulatory environment that may have a significant impact on the council's financial statements? Because we seem to have been getting quite a lot of new regulation one way or another for councils, and I just wondered if it's something that concerns you on the financial statement.
I believe it's just a split of the box. That's an extension of question 1. So the 2 lines in the management response above respond to both parts of question 1.
Sorry, I did read the earlier answers, but they, to me, answered the first. There are 3 questions in there, and there were 2 answers. It's just a little thing. I don't want to. We've got other things to do this evening, Chair. It's just, I would be interested in the answer at some point. Thank you.
Okay. You've really worried Paris now because he'd missed that. So, Jess, maybe you could just pick that up with Martin. I hope the answer is no, but if you could just pick it up with him, thank you. And any other questions on this report? Okay, Mike, I had one. I mean, it's a sort of recurring theme about capacity and resource. And Jen, you've talked about this. Sorry, Jess, you've talked about this a little bit earlier on, but you've got 2 roles you're recruiting for, which is good news. Assuming you can get the recruits, good candidates, and hire them in and get them in the door. How are you coping in the meantime?
We're managing. We did, obviously, with the delay with the accounts, Ria and I did take on a lot of work and some extra hours to try and resolve those things. So but I'm pleased to say we had a full team meeting and kind of caught up and checked in with each other today, and had a bit of a picnic lunch as well. So so that's helpful. But yeah, we're kind of ready to move forward into the rest of this process, and as I say, hopeful that we'll be able to recruit from this latest advertisement. So.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that the team are all sort of hanging in there, and I'm glad to hear you had a picnic lunch, because it's important to do these sorts of things from time to time to maintain morale. Clearly, we all know that you are a trooper, and it sounds like Ria is a bit of a trooper as well. So if you could pass on my thanks on behalf of the committee to to yourself and to the team for the good work so far. And as we've said before, if you need support from us, then please don't hesitate to ask for it. Thank you very much. Then the recommendation to committee is everything that's set out here on page 143. I won't read it all because you've read it yourselves, but is everyone happy with that? Yes. Good. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then. Good friend, thank you very much indeed. To item 9, agenda item 9, which is the annual governance statement. Jessica.
Thank you. So the annual governance statement is an important corporate document which explains the council's governance arrangements and the controls it employs to manage the risk or failure to achieve strategic objectives. The council is responsible for ensuring that its business was conducted in accordance with the law, proper standards, and that public money was safeguarded and properly accounted for during 25-26. The document is owned by all senior officers and members of the council, and it has been approved by the strategic management team. The chief executive, chief officers and managers were involved in the process and completed a detailed questionnaire to raise any issues that could be included in the AGS. The AGS has a slightly different look from previous years as there is amended guidance that is required to be adhered to from the current year. There are three main governance issues highlighted in the AGS, which are challenges in the Council's close down and financial reporting progress, which aligns with discussions earlier this evening, and we've gone over well. The impact of local government reorganisation and the need to continue to deliver business as usual, and the potential for perceived conflict of interest where members serve on multiple local authorities in the same transaction. The AGS confirms that the Council had sound governance arrangements in place during 25-26 and the period leading up to the preparation of this document. It is recommended that this committee agree the annual governance statement for signature by the Leader of the Council. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jess. Sorry for having my mic on. Any questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Jess, it's great that we have this to discuss, and I appreciate many of the things written in it. But this is a bit where I feel sad without being apologetic. I find, having read it in detail, I cannot support the annual governance statement. I don't know where that leaves us, and I'm very happy to share with my members this evening why there are certain aspects of it that I cannot agree to. It's almost to the point where I don't know, Chair, if it's possible, if we can go into closed session for 5 minutes so I can talk openly about things, or I will try to skirt around some issues and allude to them in the most vague way possible that I hope will resonate with my fellow councillors. I leave that with you.
Jim, what's your, what are the practicalities of us going into closed session for a short period of time?
Chair, we can do without knowing exactly what it is that, obviously chicken and egg, without knowing exactly what it is that Councillor Robinson wishes to discuss that can't be discussed in open session. It's a little bit difficult to say, but obviously from a practical point of view, from a procedural point of view, we are able to go into private session. I'll look to Charlie. We have a form of words which I don't have to hand, which you would need to read out, and we'd then need to pause momentarily just to turn the live stream off and make sure, which I don't think there are any members of the public on around. So if
I should add, it's because I would like to refer to, I won't refer to it in detail, but I'd like to refer to items that have been in gold papers. So that's why I wanted to be sure that we're safe to have the discussion. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Chair.
And I'm sure we've got literally tens of people following us on YouTube. I'd hate, I mean, I know it's a rest night in the World Cup, but I'd hate to think that they would drop off when we go into closed session and they wouldn't come back and they'd miss Act 2, which I think is going to be a belter. So,
all right, I'll try to. I can try very much to be elusive. I'm not very good at that because I'm usually very direct.
Equally, I don't want to put you in an unreasonably difficult position either, Councillor Robinson.
We could give it a go, and then if I can't manage, we could do that. It's really hard.
Jim, what's your advice?
Chair, to be on the safe side, I'd rather go into private session rather than members accidentally disclosing confidential information on a public live stream. That's not a place that I'd like to be.
Okay, let's do that then. We're going to go into closed session for the literally tens. Oh, hang on. I'm going to get more advice from Councillor Harrison.
I was going to say, can we not move that agenda item to the end and deal with that particular item at the end if we need to go into closed session?
Always coming with the good ideas, Councillor Harrison. Okay, in that case, we will, I don't know what the formal word is, we'll defer, suspend this item. We'll pick it up at the end to avoid any risk and keep our viewers happy. And we will move on to agenda item 10 if everyone's happy with that. Do we need to vote on that, Jim?
If you wish to move that from the chair, Chairman, and members of the committee are happy, then that will suffice.
Good. I'm moving it for the chair and you're all happy. I can see you're happy from your smiling faces. Okay, thank you. Right, agenda item 10.
Thank you, Chair. By way of introduction, I'll just give you my potted biography as deferred from earlier. I joined the Dartford and Sevenoaks Audit Partnership as the head of internal audit at the start of June. Prior to that, I've got 25 plus years of experience of audit in the public sector, internal audit and external audit, mainly in and around London, working with local authorities. In previous roles, I worked for the National Audit Office, then KPMG, and latterly I've been the head of internal audit and investigations for 2 London Borough Councils. I'm here on an interim basis initially to the end of September. Turning to the annual report, which I'll take as read, a couple of items really just to draw your attention to. The report, which you'll have seen before if you've served on this committee for over a year, summarises the results of all the audit work that internal audits carried out during 25-26, and crucially includes the head of internal audit's opinion for that period. And as you'll see if you read the report, the opinion issued is one of reasonable assurance, and that's based on the 4-point scale, which I think you'll see on page 188 of the pack. As stated in the report, this is the same audit opinion as was issued for 24-25, and it should therefore continue to give management and the committee confidence over the effectiveness of the council's internal controls, risk management and governance. Unusually in this case, although I've issuing the opinion, the underlying body of internal audit work described in this report was actually undertaken prior to my arrival and completed before I joined. Given this, I think it's important to say it was incumbent on me and really important that I spent some time reviewing that work to ensure that I was comfortable in using that as a basis of evidence and a body of work on which to draw my opinion. So I did spend some long hours reviewing the audit work that you see referred to in this report, the individual reports, the conclusions and so on and so forth, to ensure that I felt it was appropriate for me to use that as the underlying evidence on which to base my opinion. And I'm happy to say that that was the case. So it's a reasonable assurance opinion. Just to obviate the question which members may have, is a substantial assurance audit opinion possible? The answer to that, of course, is yes. What would it take to get there? Well, very simply, an improvement in the underlying audit results that you see described in this report, and sort of improved quality of assurances that we also refer to in this report as well. It's not out of bounds. It's not an unattainable ideal to get a substantial assurance audit opinion. Having opened up that door of opportunity, I will now tell you that I have never issued one. However, I haven't worked in Sevenoaks before, so there you go. Further on in the document on page 179, we refer to this issue about reliance on other assurance providers, and I just need to add some context around this in terms of what that means. For this period, we didn't place direct reliance on evidence from other suppliers of assurance. However, we're very cognizant of the work, the conclusions drawn by colleagues from Grant Thornton, and I'm sure that's reciprocated. If we had concerns over, say, for example, the payroll system, I'm sure they recognise them in their work as well. We do, however, use and have used some external suppliers for audit work on a contract basis. So we have used Hertfordshire's Shared Internal Audit Service and the South West Audit Partnership as well to undertake specific pieces of work over the past 2 years, and we'll continue to do so. We don't treat those as external audit, as external assurance providers because they work under contract to us. Those pieces of work, once they're completed in terms of field work, come to me, come to the team for quality assurance. They are then issued to Sevenoaks Council officers under my name, under the head of internal audit's name. So we quality assure those pieces of work to make sure we're absolutely comfortable with them. You will see in the report we refer to a piece of work which has been held over, which has been undertaken by the Mid-Kent Audit Partnership on licensing. Unfortunately, that hasn't been completed in time to form part of the evidence that we would use for the conclusion for this period. On page 180, I think paragraph 19 of the report, we refer to the follow-up of management actions. We reference the desirability of reducing the number of deferrals so that they're only agreed in exceptional circumstances. Alongside this, I think there's a desirable need also to manage down the number of management actions that are outstanding at any one given time, and I think that's a good indicator of organisational health if you see those numbers declining. Having said that, in the bottom right-hand corner, the number you'll see there carried forward of 48 is in effect an anomaly of timing. That reflects the fact that as we approached year end, as we approached 31st of March and our cut-off, a number of audits were finalised. So a number of recommendations were issued in the latter part of 25-26, which were then carried over into the next year. So that's why that number seems high. It is simply an anomaly of timing. Of those 48, only one of those refers to a recommendation that has previously been deferred. So I think you can take some comfort and assurance from that. On page 181, paragraph 27, we referred to, we discussed this earlier, fraud investigations. And there was 2 investigations initiated during the year which were a result of whistleblowing. By their very nature, these matters are sensitive and they are ongoing. I've spoken to officers internally about that, and I'll give you the same message, which is when you have a fraud investigation, you don't want it going on for an interminable length of time. It can become unduly protracted and the trail gets a bit cold. So we will be looking to shut these investigations down very soon and conclude on them as soon as possible. And once we're able to come back to members in this committee with more information, we will do so. The reports that support this and the reports that were issued in the last quarter, you've got a summary of these at the back of the annual report. What I will say is, if any member here wants copies of individual audit reports or would find those useful to be circulated, then I'll be completely open and honest. I'm quite happy to do so. I don't think it's quite right to bring you reams and reams of internal audit reports in their full length audit reports to this committee. But clearly, if there's a particular interest in a given report or a particular item, I'm more than happy to circulate those reports to members of the committee or to committee as a whole. And I'll pause there, quite happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you, David. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much. 2 observations and a question. First of all, I was delighted to see the point on follow-up of management actions. This has been a bugbear of mine, and I've bored this committee before on this. So thank you very much for picking that up. That was good. The other point I wanted to say how much I appreciated was in Annex A in this summary of audit reports on performance management, where you comment about the importance of indicators being measuring outcomes rather than inputs. And again, this is something that I have been worries me across the council, not just in terms of I wasn't aware that it was an issue in performance management, but obviously helpful to see that happening. And I would hope the council more generally would pick that point up. My question is, there were 2 reports where the assurance was limited. One was performance management, and you gave us and you've given us an annex on that, so that's fine. The other one was on business continuity, where again there was a limited assurance. Could you say a little bit more about the limited assurance on business continuity? I think that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not across the detail on business continuity, so I can't really comment on it at this point in time. I'm quite happy to circulate that report or a summary of it to the committee. I think it would have been part of a previous quarterly progress report, but quite happy to circulate that to members of this committee. I think the other point to say is on performance management, we refer to the issues we found there. Just to give you a bit of comfort on that, those actions are being picked up directly by Lee Banks.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, welcome, David, and how wonderful to have you on board. It was a pleasure hearing your presentation, and I think we're in very good hands for the temporary time you're with us. It's great. You can do. I was going to, in fact, ask very similar questions that make similar comments to Councillor Skinner. In fact, I want to take this opportunity to emphasise just how much those sentences resonated with me, because this is something that for 3 years I have felt that we have KPIs and we have objectives, but these things seem to be listed by somebody somewhere, and it's very hard as a member to see what the council is achieving rather than it doing. And it's wonderful that you can start here, and anything else you can encourage people to do along those lines would be fantastic. But most importantly, thank you and welcome, and hope you enjoy being here for the time that you have.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any other questions? No, okay. Just a couple from me, David, as I flagged in the email I sent. So looking at, as a bit of a sort of recurring theme of mine, looking at the KPIs on page 187 of the report, how do you think we should be thinking about C1 and I1?
Thank you, Chair. Well, look, my personal view is I'm not a great fan of audit performance indicators, because I think they probably detract from measuring the real things, which is, you know, impact, presence and value. But these are intended to be a proxy measure of the efficiency of the service. I think in terms of I1, we've got a target of 70%. The outturn is 9% and it was 10% previously. I'll need to discuss this with the team, because clearly something is adrift there. Either we're being over optimistic in some of the timelines we're setting, or there are delays in the process which we need to remediate. I don't know which of those is correct, and I suspect the answer is a combination of the two. In terms of C1, again, percentage of audits with real-time service improvements, not really sure this tells you an awful lot that's particularly useful. What it's designed to measure is when you are undertaking an audit, on how many occasions are there or do management immediately seize on something you've found, are able to remediate it there and then, and take the immediate opportunity of putting in place a new process, a new system. And clearly that's not happening on many occasions. And again, we've got to be careful how we interpret that. I don't think that's necessarily something I'm going to poke a stick at with management. I suspect it's a factor of the number of issues we're finding that are complex, that cannot be remediated in real time immediately. So again, I'd sort of question a little bit the value of that indicator, but I'll need to discuss with the team and find an interpretation of both of those, I think, to see if there is anything underlying that we need to do to improve audit processes.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if the answer is 0, but maybe it suggests that it's not, you know, a very valuable KPI, in which case, you know, maybe we should think about removing it as a KPI to save people the time and bother of digging out the numbers or doing the analysis or what have you, to give you, you know, collectively an extra hour a week. So yeah, if I can ask you to have a think about those when you're talking to the team next, that would be great. Any other questions for anyone? No. In that case, I didn't see a front page for this. Is this? Okay, that's because I saw a previous version that I just printed off at home. All right, thank you, Councillor Skinner, for saving me there. So the recommendation to Audit Committee is to note the contents of the report. Yeah, everyone happy? Great. David, thank you very much. So moving on to agenda item 11, review of the effectiveness of Audit Committee. Is this you again, David? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be brief again on this one. I think this report was largely compiled by my predecessor and also Jess's predecessor. CIPFA essentially recommends that public sector audit committees should annually review and evaluate their impact and identify areas for improvement. And it basically comes down to three questions they're asking to be answered. And the first one is, has the audit committee complied with CIPFA guidance? Has the audit committee discharged its responsibilities in terms of its terms of reference? And has the audit committee had its performance assessed? And the report you've got with the various appendices intends to answer those questions. Has the committee complied with CIPFA guidance? Well, we've gone through the position statement and the checklist, which you'll see there, which has been completed by officers on behalf of the committee. Has the committee discharged its responsibilities? And again, that's incorporated within the checklist and the CIPFA guidance. And has the audit committee had its performance assessed? And again, we've got the checklist, but we've also collated the views there of members of the audit committee. The conclusion of the report is a positive one, as it was the previous year, which is to a large extent, the audit committee has done all of those things. Now, there are a couple of areas there that you've noticed that are flagged for improvement, and I'm just going to explain a couple of them. And it's for consideration by the committee as to whether or not it wishes to implement them based on cost and time involved. One of the ones we see a lot is this issue about separate private meetings with the auditors. And I think whilst there's been separate private meetings with my predecessor, and I certainly meet with the chair, it's good practice for the audit committee to have a scheduled private meeting, separate scheduled private meetings once a year with the external auditor and with the internal audit team as well, the head of internal audit. Now, the argument against that is you might not have things you want to discuss straight away, but I think if you have a scheduled meeting, it does give an opportunity for people to think about in advance they may wish to discover in private session with the external auditor or with myself. The second thing that kind of comes out of the checklist that I'm just going to draw upon slightly is this issue about engaging with a wider group of officers and leaders through their direct attendance and participation at the committee. Well, that can mean anything you want it to mean, but we are considering a risk deep dive later. There's a possibility of thinking about how that can be extended to provide a bit more scrutiny over risk and bringing in other officers to seek their assurance over the controls and various processes that they're responsible for. We've got Detlev here this evening, who's very kindly attended to talk about that. But there are other risks as well that are outside of appetite, which you may wish to ask officers to attend to talk about directly. If you're doing a risk deep dive or something on risk and you're talking to me about it, I can tell you about our role and how we facilitate it, for example, but I won't have knowledge and I don't own the underlying controls and assurances. Those are with other officers. So there's a couple of things there to consider. I think by and large, the sort of the biggest thing I would suggest is that rather in future of having these sort of separate appendices, is that we bring this information together in a formal annual report document, which I've seen other councils do. And then that can be something that is given a bit more polish and shine, and I think is then forwarded on and taken to full council, who are formally those charged with governance. And if you read the CIPFA guidance, that's what they intend. They intend that councils produce this document. It's in the form of an annual report, and the audit committee or the audit committee chair then presents it to the parent committee, and I think it would be full council here, and it adequately shows to that body of the council that the audit committee has discharged its duties and it's complied with all the relevant guidance. I will pause there and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions, Steve?
Yeah, thanks. That was a very detailed review. I suppose my question is more, so we talk about it's compliant and it's discharging its duties. How do we measure the actual effectiveness and impact of the audit committee? And I think I was thinking about, do we have a kind of tracker to say these are recommendations made by the committee, these are actions that are taken, this is the sort of impact seen at the council? Is that something that would be useful, or you know, to produce more, something that would feed into that annual report? Is that something you've seen elsewhere?
I think something like a recommendations tracker I've certainly seen elsewhere. Impacts, one of those things that's a little bit subjective in terms of its measurement, but I think we can see this evening that the meetings had a certain impact, and I think it's just about drawing those out in terms of the annual report. So I think that's eminently doable, and we could build that into that annual report process.
Any other questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. Just to say that I think I've sat on audit since I was elected in May 2023. And in that time, my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, we've had one meeting, private meeting with head of internal audit, which was after the last meeting. I don't think we've ever had a private meeting with the external auditor. Just to say, so I'm very pleased that you've raised that as a possibility, because it's something I read in our terms of reference, but it hadn't yet happened. I'm not saying it's necessary, but I do think it's a good opportunity. So thank you for raising that, and also for raising the fact that we could ask officers like Detlev. Very grateful you're coming here this evening, and sitting through a whole audit committee whilst waiting to talk about something else. That is something I'm very glad you've raised as well, including sometimes I don't know whether to say maybe she couldn't come, but normally the portfolio holder for finance does sit at the back and come, and I think it's very helpful when they can. I know maybe the new one couldn't this evening, but we've discussed a lot that would be useful, and I think it would be nice if they were made sure they knew they were invited to come to attend, because there might be items raised that could be of use to them. Not that they have to, they're not a member of the committee. That's really all I wanted to comment, but thank you, David, for those suggestions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. I'm sure sorry, got Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Without going into any details from Councillor Thornton, I know that she would probably have been here today, but circumstances are that she's not unable to.
Yeah, I was going to say something. Well, I was going to say I'm sure that portfolio holders know that no door is barred to them, and you know, I think that you invariably see them represented at the meetings, even if they're not members of the committee. So I assumed that there would be a reason why she couldn't join us today. In terms of the meeting with internal audit, I agree. I think we've only had one, and maybe I could ask you, David, to think about when would be the most convenient time for you, or when you think would be the most useful time in the sort of the annual cycle for us to meet with you, and let us know. And similarly, Paris, I mean, we've had 2 or 3 conversations over a period of time, and I can't remember if that's been in the context of audit or finance, if I've been tagging along with conversations that Councillor Grint has had with you or Councillor Maskell, but maybe I could pose the same question to you, if you could have to think about when was the most appropriate or useful time in the annual cycle for us to meet with you.
Yeah, if I can. So we meet, I think, every sort of 6 months with the chair, and that's helpful. For meeting members, if we could do it maybe before an audit committee, that helps. That happens quite often at other audit committees. So I'm happy to have a sort of a half-an-hour session before an audit committee if that suits members in terms of attendance and things like that. That usually works quite well. Otherwise, it might be on Teams. Otherwise, it's sort of another trip. So if we could commingle it with the existing committees.
Yeah, and I think Teams is fine. I think doing it before an audit committee is fine. So if we, yeah, you know when those are. If I could ask you to have a think about when would be the most useful time in the annual audit cycle, for us to to hear from you and pose you questions, and I'll let you suggest the date. Any other questions? So I had a couple of observations. So firstly, to say thank you very much for those who filled out the self-assessment survey. I first read them a while ago, and I know that there were a couple of good suggestions. I think that they were either in Richard or Steve's replies, and I didn't get round. Apologies, I didn't get round today to reminding myself what those were. So maybe I'll reread that tomorrow and then drop a line, David, to sort of prompt a discussion as to how we can fit those ideas into our cycle. And then the last point I had was the note, the paper that you've proposed that sort of aggregates the different things you're doing that would go from audit to council. I guess question when in our cycle would that best be done? And regardless of when that is, could you start to have a think about what the framework of that, what the structure of that would be? And I guess share it with me in the first instance, and we can pull something together that that makes sense rather than troubling everybody to opine on it. Is that okay? Right.
Yeah, fine.
Any other questions for anyone? No. Okay. In that case, recommendation to audit committee that members discuss and, subject to comments, approve the self-assessment review of the effectiveness of the audit committee, Appendix A for 25-26. Is everyone happy with that? Yes. Good. Thank you very much. Item 12, risk management deep dive. As has just been said, Detlef, thank you very much for bearing with us for all this time, 2 hours or so. Shall I ask you just to dive boom straight into it?
Thank you, Chairman. We're very pleased to be here this evening just to help members understand a little bit more detail the various capital projects that we're actually involved in and how the corporate risk register works. I'd just like to remind members as well that the team has always been very at the council's disposal in terms of providing further information around risk management and also its project management methodologies and how it goes about doing those and undertaking those. I believe this is our very first deep dive, so I know that there's no exact procedure or protocol or policy in place as to how these deep dives actually take place. So it is going to be a learning curve for all of us, and as we don't know what the questions are going to be, we've tried to come here as prepared as we can with some information, but there may be certain questions that you might ask that we may need to go away and come back with. What we have tried to do is have a good understanding of the overall projects, which the team has and I have, and also Sarah has as well. And Sarah does give her apologies. She's currently on annual leave, so unfortunately she was not able to be here this evening. I'd also just like to remind members that in terms of the team's willingness, which is the capital delivery team, we did prepare back in January 2024 a report that members might remember, and that went to FIAC, and that highlighted our cost pressures and also some of the risk items that capital projects were facing at that particular point in time. And we were asked and instructed by the then cabinet member for Finance to please provide further information around particular issues. And I think that is quite an important report that should be looked at, and that will be available through the committee process and the agenda packs and minutes that have been prepared. But one thing that came out of that particular session at FIAC was a requirement to provide further information on our project management protocols and risk management processes for the particular projects that we were dealing with at that particular point in time. And a presentation was provided and given to members. Unfortunately, it wasn't very well attended by members. But then in addition to that, and following on from that, we were also asked to, there was also an internal audit that was undertaken, and that was done in October 24. And that internal audit revealed that there were reasonable assurances in place, and several of the recommendations were implemented, and those have been reported previously. So, Chairman, I'm very happy to provide further answers. Hopefully I don't ask too many questions either, because as I said, there is no protocol or process in place. So this is a learning curve for both of us, for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Detlef. And yeah, I was on FIAC in January 2024. Yeah, I recall the discussion. Not extremely well, but I recall the discussion. I'm embarrassed to acknowledge that the presentation that you pulled together for members on risk protocols, I failed to attend. The fact that lots of other people failed to attend it as well doesn't give me any great comfort. The internal audit that was done, and the assurance that sort of quite reasonable assurance, I think you said. That gives me some comfort as well. However, I think a number of members. Sorry, take one step back. So we've got 3 strategic risk categories that are that are outside appetite, and we discussed in our last audit meeting whether it was a good idea to have a deep dive. And if so, which one we should focus on, and the decision was taken to focus on this one. I think across various different advisory committees, particularly FIAC, but also improvement and innovation, we have a sort of recurring theme of concern about the large number of projects that we're running, the potential costs of those, our ability to manage them, and without wanting to flatter your ego too much, I think a lot of people, certainly myself, have taken a good deal of comfort from the fact that we've had to date your calm hand on the tiller. And as I said to Sarah in the email I dropped her, that the fact that we're losing that calm hand on the tiller so quickly after losing Adrian certainly gives me a little bit more pause for thought than I've had previously. So I flagged a number of questions to you in the email that I sent over, and I know that a couple of other councillors, Councillor Skinner and I think Councillor Lindop, sent 1 or 2 over as well. So I don't know if you could maybe start by talking us through talking us through your thoughts on or your responses to the questions that I raised in the email I sent to you, and then as a committee we can work out where we want to dig a little bit deeper, because as I say, the number and the scale of projects that the council is pursuing at the moment, certainly on an aggregated basis, I think gives us, a number of us, a degree of concern.
Thank you, Chair. We have started to collate responses to the questions that have been asked. So we do have written responses that we will hopefully, that we intend to pass on after this meeting, because we have been in the process of putting those together. So the question really comes down to, do you wish to go through them on, how do you want to proceed? Do you wish to ask questions and I respond to them, or sorry, as I said, this is new to all of us, so we're not entirely certain how you'd like to proceed.
Why don't you? I mean, I got a written response from Sarah Robson, which I've shared with the members around the sort of the three principal concerns that I had raised. One being around our sort of resource capacity. Secondarily, around contingency and margin for error on an individual project basis, and thirdly, around aggregated risk. So, maybe I can get your thoughts as a sort of first, the first line of management or first line of defence in relation to those, those concerns. First, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Thank you, Chair. If I can take the very first one in terms of resource capacity, I think it's really important to recognise that we don't design projects around individuals. We design it around the resources that are within the organisation, not necessarily in one team, but across the whole team. So we do have quite a bit of matrix working within the organisation. We've always pointed out right from the beginning that when the business cases are put together, that the internal resources do need to be augmented. And that is, I believe, probably the best approach in terms of managing projects, in terms of drawing down the specialist skills and resources that a particular project needs. Every project is different, and every project requires very different skill sets. Some of those skill sets are homogenous and quite can be used across different projects. But I think it's really important that depending on the nature of the project, that we do have the right skills. And those skills are, where possible, drawn internally within the organisation. So to give an example, on our leisure centre projects, we rely on our communities team and our existing operators where appropriate. And in addition to that, also from colleagues in finance and other departments within the council as well. So we do draw on those resources. So what we tend to have is something very much like a super project manager within the capital projects team that draws upon these resources, but also draws upon specialist resources as and when required. And apart from providing us with the necessary knowledge, that also allows us to manage costs effectively as well, in terms of bringing those resources as and when required. So that is really critical in terms of the internal resourcing within the organisation. And the teams do work quite across the organisation, do really roll up their sleeves, and everybody works very closely together. So I think this is one organisation where that works exceptionally well from my experience in other authorities. So I think that the organisation in terms of all those people working together is quite good.
So, sorry to interrupt you. So there isn't there isn't sort of key man risk in relation to individual projects or or the collection of projects that we're running.
We try to ensure that all the knowledge that is within a project is actually captured through the various registers, risk registers, through the various project initiation documents that we prepare, and also through the highlight reports. So there is no particular individual that has particular and specialist knowledge, albeit we all have our own specialisms within the team. So the team consists of a multidisciplinary team that works quite closely together. So the knowledge is shared and the information for the project is recorded. So there shouldn't be a particular key man issue.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to move on to the second sort of headline concern?
The second one is, sorry, I don't have these listed in front of me because I didn't quite know how these are going. So I'm going off memory. So if I go
nor did I. We're both making it up as we go. So I'll just read it back to you. The second recurring concern is the adequacy of contingency or margin for error on projects on an individual and collective basis.
So the contingencies that we have, I think it's really important to recognize that the contingencies do change according to the project and also change according to the stage that that project is within. The reason behind that is when we start a project off right at the beginning, from when we were given a mandate, we built in our contingencies into our development appraisals at a very high level by doing the appropriate research, but also by ensuring that the contingency level is high. So to give you an example, just generically, what we will tend to do at that point is, apart from the due diligence work that we undertake, so for example, where we're looking at costings, we would be looking at the BCIS figures at that particular point before we have external consultants advise, but we use a lot of information and we try to do as much due diligence as possible to ensure that the costings and the values that we are working on are reflective of the project and also of the area we are working within. In terms of the contingency amounts, when we start off at the initial phases, the contingency is normally quite high. So you could be talking anywhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the nature of the project. And as a project progresses, those contingencies become less. One of the areas that for all capital projects that you have is the key, one of the greatest risks that you have within a capital project is what is below the ground, because we really don't know. Asset registers, not only within this organizations, but across the whole United Kingdom and various organizations, are not as good as they should be. So quite often you'll find developments encountering underground infrastructure, underground assets, very similar to what we encountered at White Oaks Leisure Centre. Now, despite all the due diligence that was undertaken and our belief that that risk had been fully mitigated, well, not fully, but we still had contingencies allowed there, we did encounter a particular issue, despite all the organizations telling us that there were no assets under the ground, but unfortunately we encountered assets. That is one of the greatest risks when you start off a project. So our contingencies are quite high at that particular point to take into account those elements and those contingencies. So linking to another question, if I recall correctly, around lessons learned, is that is something that we've drawn upon, particularly around our experiences around White Oaks Leisure Centre, and applied that to other projects in terms of ensuring that the due diligence that we undertake is as exhaustive as possible. So in terms of not only doing additional utility searches, for doing further discussions, looking at historic maps within the area, we try to mitigate as much risk through due diligence in terms of that particular issue. So the contingencies will vary and will change as the project develops or as the project progresses. And what you will then have is three main areas of contingencies: one around design, one around construction, and one around the client, all focusing around very different elements and all incorporated by various different individuals. So for example, the contractor's contingency around construction, that is really based around, for example, increases in costs that the contractor may face, but it also depends on the type of contract that we enter into, design and build, or whether we're doing that directly, etc. So your contingency measures are also dependent on the type of contract that you use, and also the nature of the contract the nature of the contract that you've entered into with a particular contractor. The client contingency is mostly around potential specification changes that you'd like to do. But at that point in time, once we've entered into contract, a lot of the contingency risks are actually passed on to the contractor, who has, we would have undertaken additional due diligence with additional specialists on board. So for example, we would have brought on board specialist cost consultants, our specialist property advisors. And then what we would have also undertaken is, through the tendering process, the respective contractors would have had to have gone into a lot of details and explained and evidenced how they got to those figures. And those are tested through the procurement process. So the contingency is not just one contingency amount. That contingency changes over time. And I think that's really important to reflect that. And it's also important to reflect that the contingencies, the risk profile is different for different projects as well.
Councillor Grint.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Detlef, thank you very much for coming here this evening. It's extremely helpful. One question that I would like to ask is about risk assessment in terms of the projects which we undertake, and the nature of risk assessment if those projects were being undertaken purely in the commercial sector. Could you say something about that?
The risk assessments, whether you would undertake them within the private sector or within the public or within the
Could I
public.
give an example? It's been made clear to us by our hotel advisors that we may, as a local authority, be interested in developing a hotel in Swanley. But we've been told also by Colliers that commercial hotel operators at this point in time would not be that interested in it. So they're clearly taking a different assessment of risks associated with such a project. And how should that inform the way that we decide which projects to take forward ourselves?
The example that you use needs to be divided into two particular elements. One in terms of the operational risk, which we have Colliers have advised us on in terms of a operational project, in terms of a hotel operation. They've undertaken the detailed due diligence on that in terms of the financial cash flows, the market assessments, the market analysis that you would undertake whether you were within the private sector or public sector. That's undertaken. So the risk methodologies, etc., that we use are no different. The perception of risk is different. And that is where the risk perception between the private sector and the public sector is naturally different. And that comes down to the risk appetite that an organization may have, but not only based on the financial returns, but also against the objectives that the organization has. So whether it's one in terms of regeneration, housing, etc. So that needs to be taken into account. So it's not just purely on a financial metric that it is looked at. The Bevan Place project also has two particular components. One, as I mentioned, one is in terms of the operational side, which has been demonstrated to be viable. It's the development side which is the issue, because that is where you're not finding developers developing hotels at the moment, because it is quite difficult to actually get your returns on your investment in terms of doing a development. So those are two very distinct elements, particularly in terms of the example that you used. How the council views that in terms of the overall risk is, as officers, we've presented the various risks. We've highlighted that the risks that the project is high risk. But it is really, at the end of the day, in terms of whether the decision to proceed with a project is a political decision against the various objectives that the organization and members have in terms of regeneration, provision of housing, stimulating economic development, stimulating economic growth. And one of the things that one also needs to consider is the role of the public sector is that of getting involved where there is market failure. Now, where we are very different, particularly in terms of hotel operations, is that we are considered by central government to be in quite a affluent area, and we do not receive many grants. Now, hotel developments, you'll notice a lot of them are taking place up north, because the fundamentals of a hotel are there. They work well from an operational point of view. But as you pointed out, and as colleagues have pointed out, hotel developments aren't there. But those hotel developments that are taking place up north have got government grants. We don't get government grants down here. So a lot of the developments that we are undertaking, we are looking at in terms of what the potential cash flows are of that particular project. So using the example that you've used over there, we've taken a long-term view, which makes us very different to the private sector. Private sector developer will probably take a very short-term view in terms of one, develop, get out, take out your money as quickly as possible. Whereas a local government and government can actually take a longer-term view. That is the same with housing that's provided by local authorities throughout the country, where a longer-term view is taken on various housing developments and regeneration schemes. So that is a perception of the council, not necessarily officers, but what I would refer to as the body corporate, in terms of making a decision as to whether they are prepared to take a longer term view or a shorter term view.
Thank you very much, Detlef. That was extremely helpful. But I think one of the things that members of FIAC would have welcomed in the past and may well welcome in the future is some hand-holding from members of your team about what aspects of risk the members of FIAC should be considering and taking into account in coming to a decision as to whether they wish or recommend approval of a particular project. Do you feel that your team is able to guide us in the way, in the nature of the risks that we ought to be taking on board and giving consideration to?
Thank you, Councillor. What we in all our committee reports, we do provide the risk summaries, and in addition to that, we also provide the risk logs and the risk registers of where the project is at that particular point in time. As you will appreciate, that is a snapshot in terms of the risk register that's included in the reports. What officers are constantly doing is they are constantly assessing the risks of a particular project, and that is actually undertaken on a very regular basis. So, for example, we review them at least monthly, depending on the proximity of the risk that we are dealing with. What I mean by that is that if we're dealing with planning issues at this particular point in time, we will deal with those planning matters now, as opposed to focusing on construction risk, which is probably 6-9 months down the line. That's what I mean by proximity of that risk. What we try to do in terms of our committee report is give a comprehensive overview of what we believe the key risk items are. And if I am to look at the example that you used previously, we were very careful in terms of, or I should actually say, we were very explicit in terms of highlighting that the project is high risk. And that was highlighted in the reports. And we also included there the various mitigation measures that could be applied to the various risk items. And that needs to be noted. And those are the elements that are constantly reviewed at the project team level, at the property team level. So this is within the property team, within the within the council. And we report on those on a monthly basis to the corporate program board, which consists of senior officers within the council and the project managers. And we also report those to the portfolio holders at our briefings. And then in addition to that, we also report those to what is referred to as the Capital Projects Review meeting, which consists of key cabinet members that are included. And these risks are reported to them on a monthly basis.
Thank you ever so much, Detlef. I can't fault any of the items that you're discussing there, and indeed very full, comprehensive risk reports have accompanied each of the projects that come forward to consideration by, and thinking particularly of Bevan Place, there was a very full risk assessment there. But what I think members of council members, with the best will in the world, we are not experts in any of these aspects of project development, or be it construction or operation of these projects. We have no expertise. But there may, on occasion, happen to be one or more members who does have some particular expertise in that, but in general, we don't have that. And therefore, I think it's difficult for us to really grasp the nature of the risks that are set out, which were set out very clearly in relation to the Bevan Place proposals, but it's nevertheless difficult for council members to really get to grips with those risks. They don't really have a feel for what they mean and how likely they are to occur, and therefore how they should respond to those risks. Sorry, am I making myself clear, Chairman, or am I making too much of this?
No, I think think that point's very well made, Councillor Grint. Yeah. So, and I take a lot of comfort. I completely agree with what you just said. I take a lot of comfort from what you've told us, Detlev, about the the ongoing monthly reviews, and I guess that's something that's not it's not apparent to the vast majority of members. It'll be apparent to the relevant cabinet members who are part of that process, but not not beyond them. I guess sometimes part of that process or part of that regular review will be communicated to the broader membership, or it'll be communicated to FIAC, for example, because it's relevant as part of their update, or they've requested an update, but it's not relevant. It's not apparent to us on an ongoing basis, which is probably contributes to our concern.
I appreciate that, Councillor and Mr. Chairman. Capital projects, by their very nature, are very complex and they are very messy because of all the issues that we are dealing with, and it's very difficult for any particular individual to have a full knowledge base or actually be an absolute expert in terms of risks. That's why we are reliant to a certain extent on our external consultants advising. But I think the recommendation that has been made is something that we have been implementing quite recently, that Councillor Grint has recommended, in terms of that additional handholding, where we have held workshops before some of the FIAC meetings, and also in many instances after the FIAC meetings as well, depending on the nature at hand. And I think those are really important, particularly with Bevan Place, as Councillor Grint will know, is that it is a complex matter, and not all of us are hotel operators or hotel developers. And it was really important, I felt, and this was in the discussions that I had with Councillor Grint on the side, was it was really important that we actually had the consultant at that particular meeting to explain it. We can explain it up to a certain extent, but we do need to have those external resources. And this comes back to your one of your previous questions that you raised, Chair, in terms of augmenting, and do we have a capacity within the teams? And where you have those specialisms, etc., it's really important that we have the right consultants to advise us and assist us. And that was why, in this particular instance, on that project that has been mentioned, we actually went to one of the best consultancies out there that has got a phenomenal reputation in terms of delivering hotel developments, and was really important to bring them in. And I think it really is part of a relationship building with members in terms of understanding these capital projects, because they are complex. And I think the only way of overcoming some of those issues, I'm not saying that all of them will be overcome, because every individual has a different perception of risk, but it's one in terms of understanding how we've come up with the assumptions, what evidence we have used to build up the assumptions in our financial models, and also the assumptions that have been included in the risk registers that have been put together. I think that's really the important thing. It's not so much the figures, it's the assumptions at the end of the day. Yes, the figures are important, but it's how you derive that figure that is really important in terms of any development appraisal that is undertaken, and also in terms of the risk assessment that is undertaken at that particular project level. So I think that could be a really good recommendation coming forward in terms of how do we provide that added assurance in terms of the hand-holding of various members. But at the same time, it isn't a one-way process, purely because risk, it's a perception to a certain extent. And I think that is where members provide us with added insight in terms of, have you thought about certain elements that, even though you've got the best consultants in the world, somebody sometimes may come up with an idea or a question that you turn around and say to yourself, I need to go back and check on that. And That is why we actually appreciate coming to these particular meetings, because there's certain recommendations that may come out of these meetings that we will go off and look at in a little bit more detail.
That's interesting, and to pick up Councillor Grint's comments about the Colliers meeting, and I had the good fortune to be in that discussion as well, and took a lot from it. I guess part of the challenge we've got is that from a practical perspective, all the members can't be in all the discussions. It's not efficient. It's not practical. So then you then, I guess we're then relying on a subset of members being close enough to the discussion, whether that's the portfolio holder or cabinet or a subgroup selected or volunteered, self-volunteered from FIAC or wherever it may be, to be in the discussion. But then how do we ensure that the knowledge that group benefits from is disseminated more broadly?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure about how it gets disseminated more broadly, because it is an issue that we do have our project management governance arrangements within the council. Those could potentially be looked at if members are of the opinion that they would like to provide added include other members on those particular projects. But what we do have, as mentioned, is apart from the technical side of things, we do report within the established governance arrangements that we have within the council in terms of reporting to the corporate program board, and from there reporting the dashboards to the project review meeting, and also to the portfolio holders and then to the respective committees as the project progresses. But just to give you by way of an example, one of the requests was just providing updates on the respective projects and how we go about doing that. And if I can, and this will appear, and we will happily share this with you afterwards, but I just wanted to share with you. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we will happily provide you with this overview. This is a highlight report that's prepared every month, and the project managers that are involved, our internal project managers, glean over the information that's done by the construction project managers, and also through the project teams that have been put together. But one of the key things that we do is we always provide an overview, as from the last project, the project update that was provided. We always provide an overview as to where we are in terms of the spend of the project against the approved budget and what we think the planned spend is going to be. We give an indication of the emerging milestones and the key milestones, and then over here, the key decisions and key issues that will be encountered. There's also the project status. So for example, this is White Oaks Residential, which will give an indication that the current project status is regarded as amber, and whereas the previous project status was green. And that is because of a particular issue that emerged in the intervening periods between the two reports, and that was more around ground conditions. And I'm happy to say that we've overcome those. But what we also provide is what the various risks are, the immediacy of those risks that are coming up, that we feel as the project team members and senior officers need to be aware of, and where we are in terms of the overall mitigation. Now, this is drawn from the detailed risk logs that we have. So the risk logs are the corporate risk logs that we have. These are just summaries over here that we include in these highlight reports. So I just wanted to show you that. And these are presented, as I mentioned, through our corporate governance process that has been established within the council.
Do you think that the cabinet, because of their deeper insight, have a greater level of comfort around these sorts of issues than the broader membership because of their shallower insight or greater ignorance?
Okay, that's a bit difficult to comment on because I cannot comment for members. But what we do try to do is we do try to be as transparent as we can in terms of making both officers and members aware of the risks that we believe, all the issues that may have resulted. And we do highlight those, and we do try to explain that to the best of our ability. Whether members take comfort in that, unfortunately, you'll have to ask members. I can't speak for members.
Yeah, and I recognise it wasn't a very well structured question, so apologies for that. I guess where I was going was if a key part of our controls are the insight that is provided, the regular insight that is provided to the corporate program board, is something that should we be looking to try to devolve more knowledge from the corporate program board to the broader membership to assuage some of the concerns that the broader membership group might have, that those with a better understanding of the situation don't have because of that better understanding. Does that make sense?
I'll try my best on that one over there, but I think what's important is that we should not overload projects with too much reporting, because then we're starting to make project management an industry in its own right.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't suggesting more reporting. I was suggesting maybe we disseminate the reporting a bit more broadly.
Yeah, and what I was going to follow on from is we do have our established governance process and around the projects, and we do report back to the committees and on a regular basis. So I think it could be through the existing committee structures and that we do report back on these particular projects. But I think it's really important to recognize that these risks and also issues are constantly emerging and evolving, and they're constantly being monitored. So the question comes down to, at which point do you actually take the snapshot? So we might have been talking about a particular risk item. So for example, as I showed you now, a risk item around ground conditions that emerged, but we've already dealt with those. So how historic do we go and how forward-looking do we go in our reporting? And is it of any merit in terms of going into the technical details?
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. I've got a broader question, but just to start with, how many extant capital projects do we have at the moment?
So currently we have 3, which are the main ones, which is the White Oak Residential. Sorry, they're 4, my apologies. We have got the White Oaks Residential, Farmstead Drive, and Heaven Place, and the 4th one, I should know these off the top of my head. And the 4th one is Land East of the High Street.
Okay, so we only have we have 4 capital projects. These are big, significant capital projects, lots of money, lots of risk associated with them. And I think what we're discussing is that there's an underlying worry across council, all of council, about their responsibility for these projects. At the end of it, it is council who's making the decisions on these projects. It is us as councillors who will be taking, who take responsibility for it. So, and there is a kind of a strange situation, because there's a certain amount of confidence about the projects moving forward. There's certainly a certain amount of desire for the projects to move forward successfully, but at the same time, there is a concern that people aren't really confident about the risks, the management, and so on. So, where I think we're at is trying to find a way of giving that confidence out and providing council, or even committees as competent as Councillor Grint's Finance Committee, with very large documents, doesn't actually have doesn't provide that confidence. You can't do it by the weight of paper. There's something about understanding and internalizing the risk and so on. And this is what I think we're trying to get at. Now, I only had a brief look at the slide you put up, but that seemed to have information on it which provided a snapshot of where we were, which gives us gives a degree of confidence. I don't know if that's the right thing to be circulating. Something that goes beyond something that provides an assurance which isn't measured in kilograms, is measured in internalization. That's what we're trying to get at. What I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. I think it's really important that it's not the weight of the information that's submitted, it's actually the quality of the information that needs to be looked at. Unfortunately, I can't talk on behalf of members in terms of their competence and capability of reading those reports. But also what I think there needs to be a distinction here between technical risks and dealing with them at a technical matter and at a tactile matter, and strategic risks. And I think this is where councillors and need to understand is, at what level do you draw the line? Because there is an element over there that you do have people that the council has employed to manage those risks on its behalf. Your contractors, your employees' agents, your design advisors, a variety of individuals. And there does need to be a level of, I wouldn't like to use the term reliance, but assurance in place that we have got individuals that do have the competencies in place. I'm not looking at officers, I'm actually looking at the consultants, and recognizing that they are there to provide that advice. And what we do through the procurement process is ensure that we have the right consultants on board to assist us. So you don't go to a podiatrist if you've got a neurological issue, for example, and I'm trying to use that. But there is a level over there that there does need to be a distinction by members as to how deep do they wish to get involved in a project, and and that distinction needs to be between technical and strategic. Unfortunately, I can't make that decision for members.
Well, speaking personally, I'm clear that our responsibilities with strategic risk. I mean, of course, detailed risks, we need to be confident that the quality assurance procedures are in place. But of course, you're right. It's not for the council to go over every aspect of it. But understanding the strategic risk, I don't think council members understand the strategic risks confidently across all four of these projects. And I think that's what we're getting at.
So if that contention from Councillor Skinner is right, that members don't sufficiently understand the strategic risks of those four projects, how could that be addressed, Detlef?
I think that's something that we need to look at in a little bit more detail and possibly come back with possible suggestions. What I think is really important in terms of the deep dive, in terms of the corporate strategic risk register, is actually understanding what information is being put at that level in terms of the corporate strategic risk register as opposed to the project risk register. Because what we're trying to distinguish in terms of the strategic risk register, the corporate one, is not an agglomeration. It's more of a homogenization. Sorry, there is a slight distinction over there in that it is not, for example, when you're preparing capital asset pricing models, weighted average cost of capitals, etc., where or expected returns, where you do different scenarios and you agglomerate that using very fancy models and put the things together. What we've tried to demonstrate in terms of the corporate model is homogenized in terms of saying capital projects by their very nature are risky. If you're looking from an investment perspective, very few people go into developments, let alone the public sector, in terms of entering where there is market failure. But what you need to recognize is that the corporate strategic risk register tries to identify and give an indication that these are the key issues that we think are of concern. These are what the impacts might be from those issues. So we've noticed over there that market conditions, construction costs going up, which are very generic in many instances. But then focusing on that are the various control measures that the council has. Now, the question is, do members have concern with any of those control measures? Because it's very easy to speak very general in terms of what members don't have confidence. But the question is there an issue with any of the control measures that have been identified? And should we have other control measures? And then are the assurance levels that we have over there appropriate?
I think that's right. Speaking from my perspective, sorry, John, I'll come to you in a minute if I may, because the email I sent, I had 5 or 6 questions on the control measures, and it's not to say that I had concerns about them, but I didn't fully understand how they worked, or I haven't seen the lessons learned log. Be interesting to see it. So that's, I think we all recognise these are our principal risks. That's why they're on the SRR. In terms of this one, it's possibly one of our 2 or 3 biggest risks. We acknowledge that, or we accept that. The first level, because we know there are a bunch of controls that that are managing that risk, mitigating that risk. I think I and I suspect others as well would take more comfort if we understood at a practical level how those controls actually worked a little bit better. Councillor Grint.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, it's already been alluded to, but I wanted to say I personally have found it extremely helpful over the past 3 or 4 years where Detlev and his team have been extremely responsive to the need within FIAC, the committee that I've been chairing, wishing to set up a small working party to get better to grips with some of the issues concerning some of these developments. And I personally have found that extremely helpful. And Councillor Malone, you've been on several of those working parties too. And yeah, I think that is actually one of the ways that we gain assurance, the members gain assurance in relation to projects, is by having the ability to challenge Detlev and his team and other officers by going into more detail than we're capable of going into just in the course of a normal committee meeting. So I think working parties, in my experience, have been extremely valuable.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. I did think I put my hand up. I was thinking of doing so. So thank you. At the beginning of the meeting, so earlier in the meeting, Martin referred to various papers and so on. Does this mean that we will be getting written responses?
We're happy to provide written responses to the questions that have been put forward by the chair. Some of them we've discussed at this meeting already. The papers that Martin was referring to was a request by the chair to just go through a development appraisal. And what we tried to do was provide, because the development appraisals are live development appraisals on live projects, we felt it was important that the figures on there are confidential, hence the reason. But the idea that the chair asked in terms of one of the questions was, could we possibly just talk through a development appraisal? And I don't know if the chair would still like to do that or not, but if that is something that members would like to do, happily do that if they want to, and we can circulate those papers. But those were the papers that Martin was referring to.
Yeah, I'm not sure how helpful that will be, or whether that will be a bit of a rabbit hole for people. Yeah, okay, rabbit hole. Yeah, so
so may I just follow up on the question of the papers? So I look forward to the answers to the chair's question. I also asked for a summary document as well. Will that be coming forward?
Yes, we're proposing to put that all together in papers.
Brilliant.
And
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to throw doom and gloom, but I'd like us to go back to why we've asked for this deep dive. And the SRR7 is called Projects Not Realised or Not Delivered to Time, Budget or Quality. Very much appreciate Detlev's detailed explanation of how officers and their contractors control what's going on. That is not the level of my concern on risk management. And if you will bear with me, I'd like to go through the 4 because I think there are lessons to be learnt and we're still not learning the lessons in terms of communication and clarity to members. So if we start with the White Oak one, which is the oldest of the 4. Detlev, you yourself said, you know, a great risk is what's below the ground, and that's what happened in White Oak. But with respect, because I've also followed this, there was no full site survey carried out at the time, because at the time, previous administration, not this one, decided that we'd owned the ground for 50 years, didn't really need it. And asbestos and manky drains were not actually that much of a surprise. And they wouldn't have been a surprise if they'd done a proper site survey for a few tens of thousands. And instead we lost 3 million. So the extra 3 million we had to find, instead of a 17 million project, became a 3 million. And those are the things that members see. They see 17 suddenly, but we need an extra 3 million. And not only do we need an extra 3 million, we now can't afford to put in social or affordable housing on land that is owned by the council and it inherited for free. These are the things that shock members or worry them. It means they feel, I feel, we feel that someone didn't look at this properly in advance. Moving on from White Oak, now, you know, it's not, to us, this is what we feel is not value for money. And we alluded to market failure, which is of course where public sectors come
Robinson, can I ask you to
but it's about risk. Okay, I'll be
quick
quicker.
because I'm conscious of the time and we've got another
Moving
item.
on to Spittles Cross, I mean, what was that? A 40% increase in budget we were asked for? And yes, the project will now come in on budget because the budget went up by 40%. These are the concerns at member level. And that is why we see this as all very risky stuff, because we're asked for something, we're told it's going to be X, and it comes up as X plus Y very differently. Also on Spittles Cross, the Edenbridge members spoke very strongly to the fact
Councillor
that the risk...
I think we know this stuff with respect.
Yeah, but the point is, this is the forum, this is the deep dive, and forgive me, Chair, I do want to say something because I think there are some things that have not been said. On Bevan Place, we were very clearly given the risks, but all the talk about regeneration, with all the documents we were given, there wasn't a single economic development report that showed that building a hotel in this hole in Swanley that we need to do something with was actually going to create regeneration or economic development in the town. There was no economic development report. I speak as an economist, it's something I didn't find. And so again, I couldn't see why the huge risk, major risk to a 20-year project where we will eventually cover costs at the end of 20 years, because it was supposed to be there to invest in regeneration. And goodness me, I fully support a regeneration project, but I never saw the evidence for it linking the hotel with the regeneration of Swanley. And finally, one of my issues is I attend the committees that discuss the capital projects. So I do go to FIAC and I do go to IAC because I'd like to see what's going on. And very regularly at FIAC, people have questions. Oh, no, you can only talk about the money at FIAC. It's IAC that's going to discuss the project. And then when it goes to IAC at the project, they say, yeah, but how does the money link to this? No, it's not for you to talk about money. That's for FIAC. I have a problem with this splitting where there is no holistic approach. The only holistic approach comes at full council. By the time we get to full council, we're so far down the line that nobody can actually ask any good questions about the risk. So I'm very grateful for today's agenda item. I do not feel any more reassured. I'm sorry to say, I do not feel more reassured. I don't see yet that we have found a way of really helping members understand the risks at the level that we need to understand them. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Sorry, Councillor Chair, if I can just correct a couple of items over there.
Please, yeah.
What I would like to just is in terms of White Oaks, I think it's really important to recognise that detailed due diligence was undertaken prior to construction work being undertaken. Utility searches, ground radar searches were all undertaken, including detailed assessments that were undertaken, as well as discussions in terms of the searches with the various other authorities and utility providers. Those were all undertaken. The ground radars did not pick up such significant issues because they only got up to a certain depth, but those reports were actually undertaken. So I just want to clarify those issues. Now, one of the things that we have done is the lessons learned do transfer over, as highlighted previously in terms of the report that was submitted. We do prepare a report on lessons learned, but in addition, more importantly, it's not the report that is important to us as a project team. It's the sharing of the knowledge of those, of any risks, issues that materialize at the time, and learning from those immediately. So to give you a very good example, one of the things that the project officers have been doing is, because they meet regularly, they meet on a fortnightly basis, they share that knowledge amongst themselves. So particularly in terms of the ground investigation details and making sure that the White Oaks residential scheme has learned particular lessons from the White Oaks Leisure Centre scheme. And that has been applied to other projects as well. Other examples as well around that, to give in terms of some of the other lessons learned, is around engaging around some of the statutory issues and putting in the applications well in advance where we can. Another example is a very recent one in terms, something that the team has been talking about, is in terms of the role of the Clerk of Works on the various projects. So these are lessons learned that might not necessarily appear before members because they are of a technical nature, but they are being dealt with at the project level and at a technical level. I'm just trying to give that as an example. So I don't want to give the impression that a lessons log report is prepared and it's just another report that gets submitted at the end, but those highlight what the key issues are, but they are addressed by the technical team.
Yeah, and I, as I said earlier, I think the controls probably provide a lot of comfort, and they probably provide even more comfort to those who are closer to them and see the output of those, for example, lessons learned logs. But the vast majority of us don't see those things, either because we're just not part of that discussion, or because we haven't asked for them. So, to Councillor Robinson's point just now about how do we increase levels of assurance, I'm sort of wrestling. A very timely return, John. So, Councillor Robinson just posed the question as to how do we increase levels of assurance or comfort within the broader member group, and I'm sort of torn at the moment as to whether I suggest that we wait until we get your answers to my questions and Councillor Skinner's questions, and then we pick it up again, which is not going to be for 3 months' time, or if we try as a group now to come up with a group of suggestions, because I think there have been a number of comments along the way, or we see if Councillor Robinson's got a silver bullet for us.
I'm sorry, I don't think it's even base metal. I was going to suggest, I think one of the things that would help members and all of us is to entrust the risks within a project entirely to the project team. I have no reason to doubt the officer's ability to manage. I would like an emphasis, I'd like much shorter reports coming to members and really highlighting the strategic top risks, the strategic ones at the top, but members who are the ones who are accountable to taxpayers. And we have to turn around and say, yep, on the balance probability, I think this is a good project for these strategic reasons. But all we see at the moment is that we have capital projects not delivered on time, not delivered on budget. Well, I don't know about quality, but if you include affordable housing and social housing as an aim in quality, and then you can't afford it, to me that builds into quality. I would like less. The iceberg, I just want the top 10% of the iceberg. And then we could actually look at the strategic level and discuss that and leave all the detail to the officers. Jim is always keen for me not to get involved in operational matters, and I'm very keen not to get involved in operational matters on this, but I would like to have a very clear assessment of risk at a member level. How we do that, I leave to you, Chair. I don't have the silver bullet.
What's your response to that suggestion, Detlef? I've got a view on it, but what's your thought on it?
I think it's something that we can look at. I mean, we have tried previously to just summarize the risks in terms of what we go to the committee reports that were submitted. We did try to summarize those, and we were requested to actually provide more details, and hence the reason why we've then provided the detailed risk logs. So I think there is a balance to be struck, and it's something that we can go away and look at in terms of seeing, well, what is that balance?
Yeah, I can easily imagine another meeting on another day where a committee turns around or a member group turns around and says, oh, but we were told these 3 risks, and this is another one that we weren't told about because it wasn't deemed to be, one of the very top risks, but actually it materialized that it was more important than everyone anticipated at the outset. So Jim, help me out here. I don't really want to carry on because we've got one more item for talking for a long time. I'm just if we accept, is it a sort of an acceptable approach for us to see what Detlef's answers to the questions are, and then see if we can come up offline with a recommendation and bring it back to the committee?
I think through you, Chair, I think if the other members of the committee are happy to effectively leave that with yourself as chair of the committee, pending the answers that Detlef will provide to the questions raised, then that's perfectly acceptable.
Councillor Skinner, you wanted to say something?
Very much along your lines. This is our first deep dive. I don't think we've actually dived very deeply. I don't think any of us are comfortable yet. I think it would be useful both for the topic and also for the committee moving forward with other deep dives for this to come back to the next committee. I think if we had the answers to your questions, to my questions, to Councillor Lindop's questions, there may be some value in correspondence to clarify those questions and so on. But I think we should have a paper on this at the next meeting of this committee, where we can have a structured deep dive on the basis of information in front of us.
Okay, so
Can I just add? I thought Steve's questions were excellent too, but we haven't got round to them as well. So if they could also be addressed.
Sorry, thanks. I agree. Okay, let's.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just make a recommendation as well for members, is that it really is one in terms of looking at the controls and that have been identified in the strategic and corporate risk register as to whether there is any particular issue or any particular control that they feel could be added or could be removed, or they need further elaboration on, but also in terms of the assurances as well. I think that is really the value that would come from members here, because without that, I think we are looking for a needle in a haystack. And the question is, what do members want us to focus on? And if there are any concerns with the controls that have been identified, then members need to say so. If there are any concerns with the assurances that are being provided, then those are the issues, because then we can work back in terms of saying, well, this is the approach and this is what we can do. Because at the moment, if we're doing what we can, we're doing everything that we can, and yet it seems like it's not enough.
Yeah, and as you see, hopefully you saw reflected in my questions, I didn't have any concerns about the controls or indeed the assurance. I just would have benefited from understanding them more and what they actually meant in practice. So I think what we've learned here is that when I asked for the deep dive, I should have probably had a better idea as to what I was hoping to get out at the end of it. I didn't then, I do now. So can I move from the chair that we defer this till the next meeting or pick it up again? And in the meantime, Detlef will finish answering the questions that I've raised and others have raised, and we'll come with a more structured idea of what we're trying to achieve at the next one. Everyone agree with that?
Possible to have the answers to the questions well before the next committee.
Yeah, I hope so, because our key speaker's leaving, I think, before the next committee. So I'll say yes on Detlef's behalf.
Yes, we have been collating them today, as mentioned. So we'll just do a review on those before they get circulated.
Sorry, Chair, if you're concluded with that item, I wonder if you wouldn't mind moving something else from the chair, given the cut-off time's fast approaching,
Yeah,
10:30.
Yeah. In compliance with Council Procedure Rule 21.1, I move from the chair that we suspend Council Procedure Rule 16.1 and extend the closure time of the meeting beyond 10:30. All those in favour? And apologies that it's gone on so long. Right, which one were we going back to? It was
Item 9.
Sorry, annual governance statement. So, Councillor Robinson, you.
Chair, if I can, if we're going to go back to that item with a view to moving into private session, there is one more thing that you may wish to move from the chair, and then we'll pause momentarily just while we sort out the logistics.
Sorry, Chair, could I also just interrupt? But perhaps before we end the live stream, if there are any questions that members have that we could address in public session before we then take Councillor Robinson's concerns in private session, just so we can try and stay as open and transparent as possible.
Certainly, thanks. So yeah, annual governance statement, item 9. Were there any questions or observations on that from anyone else that they wanted to pick up before we go into private session? Sorry, Steve.
Chair. Well, I did have one because I know, excuse me, in the statement it did mention that around the community asset transfers and there's a conflict of interest. What controls are in place that lead us to believe we have a robust control?
Is that one for you, Jess, or one that you could pick up?
A little, just because of my experience of being in the relevant committees. It is around members declaring an interest if they've got one, and sort of ensuring that they don't vote on matters that they're directly involved. Looking to you.
So I've seen that, and I think I've probably done it once. People declared an interest in relation to a cat. I've seen it a number of times from other members. I guess my observation is, because I had a lot of sympathy for this, this point, and sort of flagged a concern about it, that members have declared an interest and then seem to think that that's a sort of defence against everything, but have they gone on to argue quite strongly one position, which seemed to reflect one of the hats they were wearing, but not all of the hats they were wearing. So it seems to me that that's not working as well as it ought to. what are officers' views on that?
If I may, Chair, just to say that I think the certainly the previous Section 151 officer has tried to reiterate that in this chamber, members are acting on behalf of this council and should be acting in the interests of this council, and that is what I've witnessed. You were going to.
Yeah, Chair, I would agree with that. And as the point as it's written in the annual governance statement is the fact that it's a perceived risk. Clearly, it's for each individual member to decide for themselves what their interest, their conflict may or may not be, to declare it, and it's for them to equally make a decision as to whether they then participate in the rest of that meeting. Advice that Martin as monitoring officer will give time and again. It's, I think, as it's raised in the annual government statement, it's the perception of perhaps, an instance, as you pointed out, where a member's raised a potential declaration, but then continued on their way through that discussion.
Again, to try and draw this to a close relatively quickly, can I suggest then that we could think about addressing this, or we could address this with some specific mandatory training around conflict management? Do you think that would be a solution?
I think Martin's, and I reluctant to speak for Martin as monitoring officer, but I suspect his response would be around just reiterating the requirements around declarations of interest, and then the ongoing requirements then around taking part in meetings. Following that, it's something which he's always happy to be on hand to advise individual members about. Harris may wish to come in there as well.
Yeah, so this is an important point. So, and it links to something that we've spoken about in relation to local government reorganisation. So we have seen this as sort of a risk for all councils in the run up to local government reorganisation in terms of decision making and sort of governance. And we sort of had a report previously where, as a firm, we are looking very strongly at things like community asset transfers between councils and, say, parish councils or town council. That's an area which we are looking at very closely. I indeed have written to the council twice on this matter, and one of the things we raised was reminding members of their fiduciary duties to this council in making those decisions. So that letter, I can't remember exactly which committee it has gone to, but that does set out the guidance around community asset transfers, our views on it. Clearly, it's for this council to make its own decision, so we're not sort of putting forward a course of action, but we are recognising that, for example, if there is a councillor who's also a town councillor and there's a decision about a community asset transfer from one to the other, being really clear about their responsibilities to this council in making that decision is really important. And effectively, as external auditors, we will be watching, and that's an area which we are looking at.
I recognise that Martin is always available to be on hand, but that seems to me to be a sort of reiteration of what's happening to date, and there are concerns that is not sufficient. So, my instinct is that some training, mandatory training around this to really reiterate the point and I guess dial home or drive home the importance of it and the risks to which we're exposing ourselves in the council is perhaps what we should be thinking about. Any other views? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the very fortunate position of not having any conflict of interest on these community asset transfers because I represent Bracestead, Chevening and Sundridge, and there's nothing there. And so I have watched with interest and sympathy, councillors who have these two hats. And I'm very glad that Paris has reminded us that we're here for the fiduciary duties to this council. But my view is that people are not conflicted, is that councillors are elected to represent both their residents and to ensure the future of community assets. And therefore, when they argue their position, what I see is someone saying, I want to save this asset for the future. And I think this, whatever it is the best route to do so, because of the changes in LGR, and a unitary authority may see those assets quite differently to the way we do. So in fact, I take issue with the fact that this is a problem. And I don't think that training will manage it. I think if you have an asset that is in public ownership, and remember, we're talking transfer, not disposal. We're not selling these where we would need to raise the best value for the council. This is about something in public ownership, which may have been inherited by this council when it was set up in 1974, and it got it for free. So in my personal view, when I watch colleagues from across the chamber, all political parties, what I see there is people working to make sure that the asset that is in discussion is given the best and safest possible future for the community concerned. And I would like to say that, and I'm lucky I can sit here on the fence to say it, I do not think that damages or affects their understanding or appreciation of their fiduciary duties to this council. Thank you.
Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that a lot of the debates have been about specific transfers rather than about the council's policy related to transfers. And the policy that is being applied for the transfers is the asset disposal policy, which is about disposals rather than transfers. And I think one of the reasons we got ourselves into quite hot water on all of this is because and hence the perception of possible conflicts is because there is often a confusion in debate between the transfer of a specific asset and the policy underlining that asset. I don't think the council's been clear on the policies, and I think people have disagreements about that, and then that comes through. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure that training is sufficient. I think that most people are very clear that they are here representing the district council. We have fiduciary responsibilities, as people are saying. We have wider responsibilities as well, and those responsibilities need to be met. So I'm not sure that training is quite the right answer either.
Any other views on that? Okay. Well, I'm happy to be a minority view. I think there's more of an issue than others seem to. I'm just quickly trying to look at the report again to see what we need to do, if anything, in relation to this point. So if we feel are people comfortable with what table 2 says on this? It's the very last line of table 2 on page 173. So it's a governance issues raised in the current AGS. So there is a potential, I guess, there's no arguing the fact there is a potential conflict. Different people may have a different view as to how well that's being managed by individual members, but clearly there is a potential for a conflict, and hopefully that's being well managed. And to the extent there are any concerns about that, then you know, Martin can remind people of their duties in that respect. John?
Chairman, I think I'm right in saying we're all going to have some training in relation to local government reorganisation coming up later this month, I believe. And that seems to be the right sort of context in which the issue might be raised.
Okay, good suggestion. Right, any other questions before we go into closed session? Or comments? No, okay, right. I move from the chair that under section 100A bracket 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting when considering agenda item or the rest of agenda item 9 on the grounds that likely disclosure of exempt information is involved as defined by Schedule